Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind howled across the barren landscape of the abandoned planet, whipping up clouds of dust that obscured the crumbling ruins of a once great Cybertronian outpost. Jagged metallic spires half buried in the sand jutted out like the bones of a long dead beast. Somewhere deep within this forgotten wasteland, Megatron stood over a glowing chamber, his red optics gleaming with a hunger that had not been seen in millennia. Finally, Megatron growled, his deep voice reverberating through the desolate corridor. He reached out, his massive hand hovering over the pulsating core of Energon Omega, a power long lost to time, and now rediscovered. With this, I will bring the Autobots to their knees. Nothing will stop me. He hesitated for only a moment, a rare glimmer of caution flashing through his mind. He knew the stories this energy had driven even the mighty primes to madness. But his ambition, as always, overpowered any lingering doubt. With a roar, he plunged his arm into the core, the energy immediately surging into his circuit. Pain then power, more power than he had ever imagined. His body convulsed as the raw force of the Energon Omega ripped through him, enhancing his strength, his speed, and his senses. For a brief moment. He felt invincible. But as quickly as the euphoria came, a searing pain followed. His mind began to fracture, as if he were two beings in one, a part of him drunk on the power, the other struggling to maintain control. He clenched his fists and let out a primal scream that echoed through the ruins, shaking the very foundation beneath him. The Decepticons, standing guard outside the chamber, exchanged uneasy glances. Starscream, ever the opportunist, narrowed his optics as he watched his leader from a distance. The great Megatron, he muttered under his breath, but even he might not be able to handle this power. Perhaps it's time for new leadership. While Megatron wrestled with his newfound strength far across the galaxy, the Autobots received word of the discovery. Optimus Prime stood at the helm of the Ark, his expression grim as he listened to the report. Energon Omega, Optimus said softly, more to himself than anyone else. I'd hoped it was only a myth. Bumblebee, standing nearby, couldn't hide his concern. If Megatron has it, what do? We stop him, Optimus replied, his tone resolute. But we must be cautious. This energy is far too unstable. It nearly destroyed the primes who tried to wield it. We cannot allow Megatron to unleash its full potential. Without wasting time, Optimus dispatched a small team to investigate and neutralize the threat. Bumblebee, being one of the most resourceful and resilient among them, was tasked with leading the mission. Alongside him were Urshis and Bulkhead, two skilled Autobots who had faced more than their share of Decepticon battle. As their ship hurtled through space toward the desolate planet, Bumblebee couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. He had faced Megatron before, but this felt different. More dangerous, more final. The ship touched down near the ruins, its landing silent, save for the faint hiss of decompressing airlock. Bumblebee and his team moved swiftly, using the cover of the jagged ruins to avoid detection. But it wasn't too long before they encountered resistance. A Decepticon patrol led by Starscream was waiting for them. The battle erupted in an instant, energy weapons flashing as the two sides clashed in the shadow of the ancient Cybertronian structure. Bumblebee ducked behind a twisted column, narrowly avoiding a blast from Starscream. Snanny Autobots, Starscream sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. You should have stayed on Earth. You were too late. Megatron already has the Energon Omega. Bumblebee didn't respond. Instead, he charged, transforming mid-stride into vehicle mode to gain speed and launching himself into the air. His fist connected with Starscream's jaw in a shower, sending the Decepticon reeling. But the battle wasn't over. As Bumblebee fought, he caught sight of Megatron in the distance. The Decepticon leader stood tall, crackling with energy that made the very air around him shimmer. And something was wrong. Megatron's movements were erratic, as though he were struggling to keep control of his own body. We need to stop him now, Bumblebee shouted to his team, dodging another blast from a Decepticon soldier.
You're going to tear himself apart and us with him. If we don't see that stuff.
RC and Bulkhead redoubled their efforts, pushing through the Decepticon ranks with the precision of warriors who had been through countless battles together. But the closer they got to Megatron, the more they realized how dire the situation was. The Energon Omega was affecting him in ways they hadn't anticipated. Bumblebee knew there was no time to waste. He accessed the ancient Cybertronian archives stored within his memory banks. searching for any mention of how to neutralize the Energon Omega. His processors raced as he sifted through the fragmented data, piecing together a chilling story. The Primes had created the Energon Omega as a means to achieve ultimate power, but they quickly discovered that it was far too unstable. Its users would gain immense strength, but at the cost of their mind. The Primes, unable to destroy it, had sealed it away, hoping it would never be found. Now that burden fell on Bumblebee and his team. There's only one way to stop this, Bumblebee said, turning to his comrade. We need the matrix of leadership. It's the only thing that can balance the energy. We don't have time to wait for Optimus to get here, Ars protested. We don't truly have a choice, Bumblebee replied, his tone firm. We hold the line until he arrived. The next moments were a blur of chaos and destruction. Megatron, driven mad by the Energon Omega, unleashed wave after wave of energy blasts, leveling entire sections of the ruin. The Autobots barely managed to keep their distance, ducking behind cover as the ground beneath them shook with each explosion. Bumblebee's optics darted to the horizon, hoping to see Optimus Prime, said ship arriving, but there was no sign of him yet. He couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of responsibility on his shoulder. If they failed, not only would the Autobots be destroyed, but the entire Transformer race might lose their autonomy forever. As the battle raged on, Bumblebee caught glimpses of Megatron's internal struggle. There were moments when the Decepticon leader hesitated, his body twitching as if two minds were fighting for control. In those brief instants, Bumblebee saw an opening, but it was always too fleeting to exploit. Finally, just as Bumblebee was beginning to fear they wouldn't make it in time, a familiar sound reached his audio sensors, the unmistakable roar of Optimus Prime's engine. Optimus descended from the sky, landing with a thunderous crash between the Autobots and Megatron. The matrix of leadership glowed brightly in his chest, its energy a stark contrast to the wild, chaotic power of the Energon Omega. Megatron, Optimus called out, his voice calm but commanding. This ends now. Megatron turned to face his old rival, his optics flickering wildly. You cannot stop me, Prime. I am power incarnate. Optimus took a step forward, his gaze steady. That power will destroy you. Megatron, you cannot control it. With a deafening roar, Megatron lunged at Optimus, his fists crackling with energy. But Optimus was ready. He met Megatron's attack head-on, the two titans colliding with a force that shook the ground beneath them. As they fought, Bumblebee and the others watched in awe. The power of the Matrix seemed to counterbalance the unstable energy within Megatron, but it was clear that Optimus couldn't hold him off forever. Bumblebee knew what he had to do. He ran toward the glowing core of Energon Omega, dodging debris and energy blasts as he went. If he could disrupt the flow of energy, maybe, just maybe, they could bring Megatron down. Just as Bumblebee reached the core, a shadow loomed over him. He looked up to see Starscream, his optics gleaming with malice. You're not going anywhere, Autobot, Starscream hissed. Bumblebee clenched his fists, ready to fight. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of the Autobots, of Megatron, and possibly the entire universe. And he wasn't about to back down. Starscream lunged at Bumblebee with a screech, his claws extended and ready to tear the Autobot apart. Bumblebee narrowly dodged the attack, rolling to the side as Starscream's claws raked the ground where he had just stood. The energy around them crackled, feeding off the unstable Energon Omega core, causing the air to shimmer with raw power. Bumblebee knew he didn't have time for a prolonged fight. Every second that passed, Megatron grew more dangerous, and Optimus couldn't hold him off forever. Starscream circled him, a cruel grin on his face. You think you can stop Megatron? You were a fool, Bumblebee. This is the end for the Autobots for you. Bumblebee didn't respond. His processor raced, calculating his next move. He knew he couldn't come up fight Starscream, not with the Decepticon's aerial advantage. But he didn't have to win this fight. He only needed to distract him long enough. Without warning, Bumblebee transformed into vehicle mode, his wheels screeching as he launched himself forward. Starscream's optics widened in surprise as Bumblebee sped straight at him, but just as Starscream prepared to strike, Bumblebee swerved hard to the left, skidding into the shadows of the crumbling ruin. Starscream snarled and transformed into his jet mode, taking off into the air with a burst of energy. Bumblebee sped through the ruins, his sensors scanning for any path that would lead him back to the Energon Omega core. He could hear Starscream above the Decepticon starsters roaring as he searched for his prey. Bumblebee had to think fast. If he didn't disable the core soon, Megatron's sesh could destroy them all. As he rounded a corner, Bumblebee spotted a narrow passageway leading deeper into the structure. It was tight too small for Starscream to follow in his jet mode. He transformed back into his robot form and darted inside, ducking under fallen beams and rubble. Behind him, he could hear Starscream's frustrated roar, the Decepticon unable to pursue him in the confined space. Bumblebee didn't slow down. He was close. He could feel the energy growing more intense with every step. The pulse of the Energon Omega reverberated through the metal wall, sending sparks dancing along the floor. Finally, he emerged into the chamber where the glowing core of energy pulsed like a heart, filling the room with an eerie, almost mesmerizing light. Optimus and Megatron were locked in a brutal struggle in the center of the chamber. Megatron's body radiated with power, his every movement sending shockwaves through the air. But Bumblebee could see the toll it was taking on him. His movements were jerky, erratic, as if he were struggling to control the power within him. Optimus fought with precision, using the matrix of leadership to counter Megatron's wild attacks, but even the great leader of the Autobots was being pushed to his limit. Bumblebee knew what he had to do. He sprinted toward the core, ignoring the searing heat and the waves of energy threatening to tear him apart. His processors buzzed with calculations. He needed to destabilize the core, disrupt the flow of energy to Megatron, but without causing it to explode and take them all with it. He was sure it was even possible, but he had to try. Just as Bumblebee reached out toward the core, a blast of energy knocked him off his feet, sending him crashing into a nearby wall. Starscream had found him. The Decepticon landed with a thud, his wings flaring out as he pointed his blaster directly at Bumblebee. "Did you really think you could escape me, Autobot?" Starscream sneered. "Megatron may be losing his mind, but I will take over where he fails, and you—" Starscream never finished his sentence. A sudden blast from behind sent him sprawling across the chamber. Bumblebee looked up to see Bulkhead and Arceus charging, in their weapons glowing as they rushed to his aid. "Go," Arceus shouted, firing another volley of shots to keep Starscream down. "We've got your back." Bumblebee didn't hesitate. He scrambled back to his feet and sprinted toward the core once again. This time, there was no stopping him. He reached out, his hand grasping the console connected to the core's power grid. His fingers moved with lightning speed, pulling up ancient Cybertronian schematics and bypassing the energy lock. The core pulsed violently, the light growing more intense as Bumblebee worked. He could feel the energy surging, threatening to overload, but he was so close if he could just. A deafening roar shook the chamber. Megatron, in a final desperate surge of power, threw Optimus across the room, sending him crashing into a pillar. The Decepticon leader turned, his optics glowing with a terrifying mixture of fury and madness. "No," Megatron bellowed, lunging toward the core. "You will not take this from me, Bumblebee." Bumblebee barely had time to react. Megatron's fist came down like a hammer, but just as it was about to strike, Optimus leapt between them, taking the full brunt of the attack. The force of the blow sent Optimus crashing into Bumblebee, both Autobots tumbling to the ground in a heap of metal and spark. For a moment, everything went still. Megatron stood over them, his body crackling with unstable energy, his optics flickering wildly. He raised his hand again, ready to deliver the final blow. But then the core exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave knocked everyone off their feet, sending debris flying in all directions. Bumblebee's vision blurred as the intense light seared his optic. He could feel the energy surging through the room, threatening to consume them all. But then something incredible happened. The matrix of leadership still glowing within Optimus' chest reacted to the explosion. Its light flared, merging with the chaotic energy of the Energon Omega, creating a harmonious balance. The wild, destructive power of the core began to stabilize its glow, softening as the matrix synergy counteracted the instability. Megatron let out a roar of frustration, his body jerking as the power within him began to fade. He staggered back, his once mighty form now weakened and vulnerable. The madness in his optics faded, replaced by a cold, hollow rage. "It's not over, Megatron," Optimus said, his voice steady despite the strain of the battle. "You cannot control this power. It will destroy you." For a moment, Megatron stood there, trembling with barely contained fury. But then with a snarl, he turned and fled, his form disappearing into the shadows of the ruin. Starscream, still recovering from the blast, scrambled after him, casting one last hateful glare at the Autobots before vanishing into the night. The chamber fell silent, save for the soft hum of the now stable Energon Omega core. Bumble boxed onto the ground, his system struggling to recover from the strain of the battle. He looked up at Optimus, who was standing over the core, his optics glowing with the soft light of the Matrix. "We did it," Bumblebee said, his voice weak but relieved. Optimus nodded, though. His expression remained somber. "Yes, Bumblebee. But this is only a temporary victory. The Energon Omega is still too dangerous. We must seal it away as the Primes did before us, so that it cannot be used again." Bumblebee managed a weak smile. I hope it stays lost this time." Together, the Autobots worked to secure the core, ensuring that its power would never fall into the wrong hands again. As they left the ruins behind, Bumblebee couldn't shake the feeling that their battle with Megatron was far from over. But for now, at least they had won a reprieve, a chance to rebuild, to recover, and to prepare for whatever came next. And as they soared back into the stars, Bumblebee knew that as long as they stood together, there was hope for the future of Cybertron. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The battlefield crackled with the chaos of war. Explosions thundered from every direction, and energy blasts streaked across the sky. Bumblebee ducked behind a smoldering boulder, sparks flying from his damaged armor. The Autobot's optics flickered briefly, but his determination never wavered. Just ahead, across the smoldering battlefield, his mortal enemy, Megatron, towered over the wreckage, his dark silhouette framed against the blazing horizon. Bumblebee knew he was outmatched. Megatron had been relentless, and this conflict, this endless war, seemed to be reaching its breaking point. The Decepticons had gained ground today, and the Autobots were on the defensive. Bumblebee checked his energy levels, low but not empty. He could still fight. He charged forward, dodging blasts from Megatron's fusion cannon. The Decepticon leader, still laughter, boomed across the battlefield, a deep, menacing sound that chilled Bumblebee's circuit. "Foolish Autobot," Megatron sneered. "You think you can challenge me? I'll tear you apart." Bumblebee said nothing. Words wouldn't save him here. He was smaller, more agile, but Megatron's brute strength was unparalleled. All he had was his speed and his wit. As Bumblebee darted between the ruins of destroyed machinery, his scanners picked up an anomaly, a strange energy signature pulsing nearby. It wasn't your Autobot, and it wasn't a Decepticon. Whatever it was powerful. He ducked behind another piece of debris, just as Megatron unleashed a barrage of fire, pulverizing the ground where Bumblebee had been standing moments before. But Bumblebee wasn't interested in the firepower. His sensors were locked on the anomaly, a glowing rift in the air, about 50 meters away. It was a swirling vortex of energy tearing through the fabric of space itself, the edges crackling with unstable power. "What in the world?" Bumblebee muttered. His brief distraction cost him. Megatron lunged, closing the distance in a blink, his massive hand wrapping around Bumblebee's sense frame. With a vicious snarl, Megatron hoisted Bumblebee into the air. "Your time is up, Autobot." Bumblebee struggled, his servos whirring in protest as he tried to free himself from Megatron's crushing grip. But then something strange happened. The energy rift pulsed, and a powerful shockwave rippled out, engulfing them both. Bumblebee's optics widened in shock as the fabric of reality around them warped, twisting in ways that defied comprehension. Before either of them could react, the rift expanded and swallowed them whole. The battlefield disappeared in an instant. Bumblebee hit the ground hard, his system screaming in protest as he bounced across the rocky terrain. Dust filled the air, and for a moment, everything was a blur. His audio receptors buzzed with static, and his optics struggled to adjust to the sudden change in environment. Groaning, Bumblebee pushed himself to his feet, his servos trembling from the impact. The world around him was unfamiliar, vast, barren, and devoid of any technology. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground was covered in dense vegetation and jagged rock formation. "Where am I?" he muttered to himself, scanning the area. His internal systems worked to recalibrate, and after a moment, they confirmed the unthinkable. This was Earth, but not the Earth he knew. The readings were off by millions of years. This was ancient Earth, long before human civilization, long before the Autobot-Decepticon war had ever reached its shore. Before he could process this fully, a low rumbling growl echoed across the landscape. Megatron. Bumblebee turned to see the massive Decepticon emerging from a pile of debris, his crimson optics glowing with fury. You, Megatron snarled, his voice dripping with hatred.
What have you done?
I didn't hear you do anything, Bumblebee snapped back, his voice unsteady as he prepared for another fight. But something told him this wasn't the place for a brawl. His optics darted around, and he noticed strange metallic structures dotting the landscape, ruins of some kind, overgrown with ancient flora. And then he saw them, giant hulking figures moving in the distance. Mechanical creature. Bumblebee froze as one of the massive beasts stepped into view. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, an enormous lumbering machine, easily 3 times the size of any Cybertronian. Its body was a strange blend of organic and mechanical components, with vines and foliage growing from its joints and armor plating. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green light, and its movements were slow but deliberate. Megatron, its gaze followed Bumblebee's and for a brief moment, both Autobots and Decepticons were united in their awe and apprehension. What are those things? Bumblebee asked, though he knew Megatron had no more answers than he did. They ring nothing compared to me, Megatron growled, clenching his fist. I will crush them just like I'll crush you. Before Bumblebee could respond, the giant mechanical creature turned its gaze toward them. Its glowing eyes locked onto their position, and with a deafening roar, its sharp instinct kicked in. Bumblebee darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature, saw a massive foot as it stomped down where he had been standing. The ground shook with the impact, and debris flew in all directions. Megatron, on the other hand, didn't flinch. He raised his fusion cannon and fired a concentrated blast of energy directly at the creature's cellular head. The shot connected, and for a moment, it looked like the beast might fall to. But then it roared again, seemingly unfazed by the attack, and swung one of its massive limbs toward Megatron. The Decepticon leader was thrown backward, slamming into a nearby rock formation with enough force to crack the stone. Bumblebee watched in disbelief. Megatron's firepower had always been unmatched, but this creature had shrugged off his attack like it was nothing. Whatever these things were, they were built to withstand serious punishment. We need to get out of here, Bumblebee shouted, scrambling to his feet. Megatron growled, pushing himself up from the rubble, but he didn't argue. Even he could see that this was a fight they couldn't win, not now at least. The two of them retreated, the giant mechanical beast lumbering after them, its footsteps shaking the ground. As they ran, Bumblebee's sensors continued to scan the environment, trying to make sense of where they were and how they had ended up here. The energy signature from the rift was gone, and there was no indication of how or when they would be able to return to their own time. But one thing was clear, they weren't alone on this ancient Earth, and whatever these mechanical creatures were, they were dangerous. Bumblebee and Megatron reached a narrow canyon, the walls rising high above them. It was a temporary refuge, but it would give them a moment to regroup. What's your plan, Megatron? Bumblebee asked, still on edge. Because right now, fighting each other isn't going to get us anywhere. Megatron glared at him, his optics glowing with malice. Don't mistake this for a truce. Autobot, the moment we were out of this mess, I will end you. Bumblebee didn't doubt it for a second, but for now he needed Megatron as much as Megatron needed him. Together they stood a chance of surviving long enough to find a way back to their time. We need to figure out what those things are, Bumblebee said, keeping his distance from the towering Decepticon. And if there's a way to use this environment to our advantage. Megatron's optics narrowed. There's more to this place than meets the eye, he muttered, his gaze drifting toward the ancient ruins that littered the landscape. These creatures, they were guarding something powerful. Bumblebee followed his gaze. The ruins were strange, almost alien, even to him. They weren't of Cybertronian design, but there was a sense of familiarity in the technology, a sense that whoever had built this place had access to advanced knowledge far beyond what existed in their time. Whatever it is, we need to find it, Bumblebee said, his determination growing. If it's powerful enough to be guarded by those things, it might be our only way back. Megatron smirked for once. Autobot, we agree. Together, the unlikely allies ventured deeper into the canyon, knowing that their only hope of survival and escape lay in uncovering the secrets of this ancient world. Bumblebee and Megatron moved cautiously through the narrow canyon, the towering stone walls on either side casting long shadows over the uneven ground. The distant roars of the mechanical creatures echoed faintly behind them, reminding them that time wasn't tied on their side. Neither spoke, though. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was tense, filled with the constant undercurrent of animosity that had fueled their rivalry for so long. As they emerged from the canyon, the landscape opened up before them, revealing a sprawling valley littered with ancient ruins, metallic structures that looked like they had been part of a massive city once now, overgrown with vegetation and weathered by time. Bumblebee's optics zoomed in on several towering monoliths in the distance, each one covered in strange symbols and markings. The structures seemed to pulse with a faint otherworldly glow, as if they were still alive in some way. "We were not alone here," Bumblebee muttered under his breath, scanning for any signs of life. The mechanical beasts were one thing, but something about these ruins felt aware. Megatron's optics glowed with interest as he gazed at the structure. "This is not the work of primitives," he said, his voice low and contemplative. "There is power here, Autobot, power we must see." Sees Bumblebee turned toward him, incredulous. "We don't even know what we were dealing with. We need to find a way back, not get distracted by it." Before he could finish, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Bumblebee's optics widened as cracks began to spiderweb across the surface, and without warning, the earth gave way beneath them. Both Autobots and Decepticons tumbled into the dark, disappearing into the abyss below. They landed in what appeared to be an underground chamber. The walls were lined with the same strange metallic materials as the ruins above, and in the center of the room stood an enormous circular structure, a ring-like device, ancient and dormant. Energy pulsed faintly from its core, like the slow beating of a heart. Bumblebee groaned, pushing himself up from the ground. His internal systems were struggling to stabilize after the fall, but his optics quickly locked onto the device. It was unmistakable. This was some sort of ancient portal. His scanners indicated a faint energy signature that resembled the rift that had brought them here. Megatron was already on his feet, his gaze fixed on the portal. "This is it," he growled. "This is how we return to our time." Bumblebee hesitated. "We don't even know how it works. It's been dormant for who knows how long." "Then we will make it work." Megatron snapped, striding toward the control panel that was embedded into the wall near the portal. His fingers danced over the symbols, his mind racing as he tried to decipher the ancient language. As Megatron worked, Bumblebee's cell sensors detected movement. His optics darted to the shadows, where he saw the silhouette of one of the mechanical creatures, much smaller than the ones they'd encountered above, but no less threatening. It slunk toward them, its glowing eyes fixed on the two Cybertronians. Without hesitation, Bumblebee raised his blaster and fired, the shot lighting up the chamber as it struck the creature dead center. It let out a metallic screech before collapsing in a heap of broken parts. "That was just a scout," Bumblebee warned, keeping his blaster at the ready. "More will be coming." "Then buy me time." Megatron growls, his focus never leaving the control panel. "I need to activate the portal." Bumblebee gritted his teeth, knowing that Megatron was right. As much as he hated it, they had to work together for now. He positioned himself near the entrance of the chamber, scanning for any more of the mechanical beasts. His optics picked up several more heat signatures moving toward them. The creatures attacked in waves, each one more aggressive than the last. Bumblebee's blasters fired rapidly, taking out the smaller ones with precision shots, but it wasn't too long before larger beasts started to appear. These were more resilient, their armor thicker, and their movements more calculated. Bumblebee dodged and weaved his servos, working overtime as he evaded their strikes, but the sheer number of them was overwhelming. He couldn't hold them off forever. "Megatron, whatever you were doing, do it faster," Bumblebee shouted as he blasted another creature that lunged toward him. "Silence, Autobot," Megatron snarled, though Bumblebee could hear the strain in his voice. The Decepticon leader was struggling to make sense of the ancient technology, his frustration mounting as the symbols on the control panel continued to defy his understanding. Suddenly, a low hum filled the chamber. Bumblebee glanced over his shoulder to see the portal beginning to flicker with life, its dormant rings rotating slowly as energy coursed through them. The portal was activating. Megatron stepped back from the control panel, a satisfied smirk on his face. "It's sorry, Doc." Bumblebee didn't have time to respond. The largest of the mechanical creatures, a towering, four-legged monstrosity, charged into the chamber, its massive limbs shaking the ground with each step. Bumblebee barely had time to dive out of the way as it swung one of its claws at him, narrowly missing his head. "Megatron," Bumblebee shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to go now." Megatron's optics narrowed as he glanced at the portal. "Agreed. Without another word, the two Cybertronians sprinted toward the portal. The mechanical beast roared behind them, its massive form barreling through the chamber, determined to stop them. Bumblebee's systems screamed in protest as he pushed himself harder, his feet pounding against the metallic floor as the portal loomed ahead. Just as they reached the edge of the portal's sus energy field, the creature lunged at them. Bumblebee felt its claws graze his back, but he didn't stop. With a final surge of power, he and Megatron leaped into the portal, the energy field enveloping them in a blinding light. The world around them twisted and distorted once again, the familiar sensation of being torn through time and space overwhelming their senses. Bumblebee's optics flickered, his systems struggling to process the overwhelming input. It felt like they were suspended in a void, hurtling through the time stream with no control over their destination. And then just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Bumblebee and Megatron tumbled out of the portal, landing hard on the ground. Bumblebee's systems groaned in protest, and he took a moment to recalibrate. When he finally opened his optics, he was greeted by the sight of familiar surroundings. They were back. The battlefield was still smoldering, the signs of their earlier conflict scattered across the landscape. The war between the Autobots and Decepticons was far from over, but for now, they had returned to their own time. Bumblebee slowly got to his feet, his optics scanning the horizon. Megatron was already standing, his towering form silhouetted against the fading light. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of what they had just experienced hanging heavy in the air. But the moment of silence didn't last long. "This changes nothing," Autobot Megatron growled, his voice cold and hard. "Our war continues." Bumblebee nodded, his stance shifting into a defensive posture. He knew that their alliance had been nothing more than a temporary necessity. Now that they were back, the old animosities would resume. Megatron turned and began walking away, his fusion cannon humming ominously as he disappeared into the distance. Bumblebee watched him go, his own blasters at the ready in case of an ambush, but Megatron didn't look back. The Autobot let out a sigh of relief once Megatron was out of sight. For now, the battle was over, but as Bumblebee looked out over the ruins of the battlefield, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ancient power they had discovered would come back to haunt them. The time rift, the mechanical creatures, the ruins, they were all pieces of a puzzle that was far from solved. And as long as Megatron was still out there, the future remained uncertain. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The landscape of Cybertron had always been a place of cold beauty, vast plains of shining metal, great spires stretching to the sky, and beneath its surface, ancient technology humming like the lifeblood of the planet. But now, there was a tension that pervaded the air, something darker, more sinister. Megatron stood at the edge of a deep fissure in the planet's surface, his red optics glowing brighter than usual, scanning the ancient texts displayed on a holographic screen before him. These weren't just any texts. They were the oldest records from Cybertron's creation, information that had been hidden for eons. The Decepticon leader had always been obsessed with power, but what he had uncovered here was more than even he had hoped for. "Starscream report?" he barked, his voice a metallic snarl. The air around him seemed to buzz in response, almost as if time itself was bending to his will. Starscream, ever loyal but always treacherous, approached cautiously, his sleek form hovering just a few feet off the ground. "We've secured the perimeter, Lord Megatron. No sign of Autobots in this sector yet." Megatron's lip curled into a cruel smile. "Good. Once I activate the chronoconductor, it won't matter if they come. I will rewrite history itself. They'll never have existed to stop me." The chronoconductor, a device of unimaginable power, capable of manipulating time. It was said to have been created by the first Cybertronians locked away because it posed too great a threat to the natural order. But Megatron cared little for order. He only cared about conquest. With a flick of his wrist, Megatron closed the holographic screen and stepped forward, the ground beneath him vibrating with each heavy footstep. Before him, nestled within a jagged crevice of the planet's surface, was the device. It looked deceptively simple, a metallic sphere with strange etchings running across its surface, pulsing faintly as if it were alive. Megatron's fingers curled around the device, and for a moment everything was silent. Then with a flash of blinding light, the The chronoconductor activated. The sky above him twisted into a whirlpool of dark clouds, streaks of blue lightning flashing in and out of existence. The very air around him seemed to warp as if reality itself was being torn apart. Finally, Megatron growled, his voice laced with triumph. "With this, I will become the ruler of all time." But his victory would not go unchallenged. On the far side of Cybertron, in the Autobot base, Bumblebee had just intercepted a transmission. His internal systems buzzed with activity as he deciphered the message, but the contents were more troubling than anything he had expected. "Optimus, you need to see this," Bumblebee called out, his voice carrying the urgency of the situation. Optimus Prime turned from his position near the main console, his blue optics narrowing as he approached. "What have you found?" Bumblebee. "It's Megatron. He has found something ancient. I am not sure, but it's called the chronoconductor, and whatever it is, it's so powerful. He plans to use it to change the timeline, erase us from existence." Optimus' expression darkened. "If Megatron controls time, the future as we know it will cease to exist. We must stop him." But the others, Bumblebee interjected. "They were scattered across the galaxy. We were the only ones here." Optimus rested a hand on Bumblebee's shoulder, his voice calm but commanding. "Then we will do what we must. You will go, Bumblebee. I have faith in your ability to stop Megatron. I will send reinforcements as soon as I can." Bumblebee hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. "I won't let you down, Optimus." With that, Bumblebee transformed, his engine roaring to life as he sped off toward the coordinates in the transmission. He had always been quick, one of the fastest Autobots, but even he couldn't outrun time itself. And time, it seemed, was already bending to Megatron's will. As Bumblebee raced across the metallic plains of Cybertron, the sky above him grew darker, swirling with unnatural cloud. Time anomalies began to ripple through the air. He caught glimpses of Cybertron as it had once been in the days of peace before the war. And then in stark contrast, he saw flashes of what it could become under Megatron's size, rule a desolate wasteland with Decepticons ruling over a universe enslaved. His scanners buzzed with information, but none of it made sense. Everything was shifting too fast. One moment, he saw a pristine Autobot city in the distance, and the next, it was nothing but ruins. He was running out of time. At the heart of Cybertron, Megatron stood in front of the chronoconductor, his dark figure silhouetted against the flashing lightning above. He could feel the power coursing through him, warping reality, bending it to his will. Already, he had erased key moments from history. He had undone the Autobots' victory at Tiger Pax, where they had first secured the Allspark. Without that victory, the war had taken a different turn, and the Decepticons had crushed the resistance with ease. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted to rewrite the entire universe, ensuring that every event, every moment, served his purpose. Lord Megatron Starscream's source voice interrupted, filled with awe and hesitation. "The timeline is unstable. We need more power to stabilize the changes." "Fool," Megatron spat. "The power of the chronoconductor is limitless. It will bend to my will." Starscream nodded, but his optics flickered with doubt. Even he could feel the instability in the air, the way time seemed to tear at the edges, unraveling the fabric of reality itself. Suddenly, a bright yellow flash shot through the air, and Bumblebee transformed in mid-leap, landing in a crouch before Megatron. His blasters hummed with energy, aimed directly at the Decepticon leader. "Megatron," Bumblebee shouted, his voice filled with determination. "This ends now." Megatron turned slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Bumblebee, ever the loyal Autobot, but you were too late. The timeline is already mine to control." Bumblebee fired his blasters, but Megatron barely flinched. The energy bolts warped in midair, twisted by the temporal distortions, and vanished into thin air. "You see," Megatron gestured to the swirling sky above them. "Time bends to my will. You cannot defeat me, Bumblebee. I'm inevitable." But Bumblebee wasn't one to give up so easily. He charged forward, his fists crackling with energy, aiming for Megatron's chest. Time rippled around them, flashes of alternate realities blinking in and out of existence as they fought. Bumblebee saw himself fall in one timeline, and in another, he saw Megatron victorious, standing over the ruins of Earth. But Bumblebee pushed through the chaos, dodging Megatron's massive fists, using his agility to stay one step ahead. He couldn't overpower Megatron, not physically, but he didn't need to. He just needed to buy time. With a quick maneuver, Bumblebee disengaged from the fight and activated his internal systems, sending a distress signal back to Optimus. He couldn't do this alone. But even as he sent the signal, the timeline continued to collapse. The sky above them crackled with energy and the ground beneath their feet trembled as time itself began to tear apart. Megatron, sensing Bumblebee's desperation, laughed darkly. There's nowhere left to run, Bumblebee. Soon the timeline will collapse entirely and I will reshape it in my image. But Bumblebee wasn't sure running. He knew the only way to stop Megatron was to destroy the chronoconductor itself. If he could disrupt its power source, even for a moment, he could destabilize the timeline enough to stop Megatron's change it. Bumblebee darted forward again, this time ignoring Megatron's taunt. He had to get closer to the chronoconductor. His scanner showed it was directly linked to Cybertron's core. If he could sever that connection, he might stand a chance. But getting there was the problem. Megatron loomed large in his path, time itself twisting and warping around them, creating a battlefield where the laws of physics barely apply. With a quick dash, Bumblebee rolled under Megatron's massive arm as it swung toward him, the force of the blow sending shockwaves through the ground. He fired his grappling hook, latching onto a nearby pillar, and used the momentum to launch himself toward the chronoconductor. His plan was simple: destroy the power source, stop Megatron's sciences, and hope that time would stabilize on its own. But just as he neared the device, a massive force slammed into his side, sending him crashing to the ground. Megatron had anticipated the move. "Did you really think you could stop me, Bumblebee?" Megatron sneered as he stalked closer. His optics blazed with the madness of power. "The moment I activated the chronoconductor, the timeline became mine to command. You are nothing but a relic of a failed resistance." Bumblebee struggled to his feet, sparks flying from his damaged armor. He could feel the timeline shifting, altering the very space around him. The ground beneath him flickered one moment. He stood on the surface of Cybertron as it had been before the war, gleaming and whole. And the next it was a desolate wasteland covered in the ruins of battles yet to be fought. Megatron charged, and Bumblebee barely had time to dodge. He fired a series of blasts at the Decepticon leader, hoping to distract him long enough to make another run for the chronoconductor. But the energy beams twisted in the air, distorted by the time rift. Megatron laughed, swatting the blasts away. "Like fly. You see, Bumblebee, this is the power of time." Megatron boomed. "With this, I can rewrite everything. Every defeat I've suffered, every time the Autobots have stood in my way will be undone. I will rule not just Cybertron, but all of time itself." Bumblebee's systems were running hot, his processors overclocked as he tried to calculate any possible way out of this. He couldn't defeat Megatron head-on, not in this chaotic environment where time was an unstable, unpredictable weapon. But he did need to defeat Megatron. He just needed to disrupt the timeline long enough to cause a reset. With a desperate move, Bumblebee transformed, his engine roaring as he sped toward the chronoconductor. Megatron let out a roar of fury and lunged after him, but Bumblebee had gained too much speed. He weaved between the jagged rocks and broken structures, dodging Megatron's wild swings, his optics locked on the glowing device just ahead. The chronoconductor pulsed with a strange, hypnotic energy, its surface glowing brighter as the time rift widened. Bumblebee could feel the pull of the device, drawing him toward it as though time itself wanted him to intervene. But he didn't have much time left. Megatron was closing in, and the timeline was collapsing faster than he had anticipated. Just as Bumblebee reached the chronoconductor, he transformed back into his robot form, skidding to a halt in front of the device. His servos ached, and his systems were overheating, but he couldn't stop now. With a swift motion, he raised his blaster and fired directly into the heart of the chronoconductor. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and the device let out a high-pitched whine as it struggled to maintain its connection to the core. Sparks flew from its surface, and the glowing symbols along its side flickered wildly. Bumblebee fired again, and this time the chronoconductor let out a deafening crack as its energy field began to destabilize. Megatron howled in rage, charging toward Bumblebee with all his might. "You fool, you'll destroy everything." But Bumblebee stood his ground. The chronoconductor was his only chance. He fired once more, and with a final, blinding flash, the device shattered. For a moment, everything stopped. The swirling clouds above them froze, and the ground beneath their feet became eerily still. Time itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the universe was deciding what to do next. And then, with a deafening roar, the timeline collapsed. Bumblebee was thrown backward as the shockwave tore through the air, sending him crashing into a nearby wall. His system screamed in protest, but he forced himself to stay online. He couldn't afford to black out, now not when everything depended on what happened next. Through the haze of smoke and debris, Bumblebee saw Megatron struggling to his feet, his optics flickering as though he, too, was trying to make sense of the chaos around him. But something was different. The air felt lighter. The oppressive weight of the timeline had lifted, and Bumblebee realized with a start that the chronoconductor's destruction had worked. Time was beginning to stabilize, resetting itself to its original state. Megatron roared in fury, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the timeline snapping back into place. The sky above them cleared, the dark clouds dissipating as the time rift closed. The ground beneath their feet solidified, returning to the metallic surface of Cybertron as it had been before. Bumblebee stood slowly, his joints aching from the battle, but a sense of relief washed over him. They had done it. The timeline was safe. Megatron's Sal's plan had failed. But Megatron was not so easily defeated. Even as the timeline stabilized, he rose to his full height, his optics burning with fury. "This isn't over, Autobot," he snarled. "You may have stopped me this time, but the war is far from over." Bumblebee didn't flinch. He had heard Megatron's threats before, and while he knew the war would continue for now, they had won. "You'll never win, Megatron," Bumblebee said, his voice steady. "As long as there's a single Autobot left, we'll keep fighting." Megatron's lip curled in a snarl, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and transformed into his alt mode, his engines roaring as he sped off into the distance. Bumblebee watched him go, his systems finally starting to cool down. He knew this wasn't the last he would see of Megatron, but for now, the universe was safe. As the dust settled, Bumblebee activated his comms, sending a signal back to the Autobot base. "Optimus, it's over. The timeline is safe. Megatron, sent gone." There was a brief pause, and then Optimus' voice came through the line, calm and steady. "As always, well done, Bumblebee. The universe owes you a great debt." Bumblebee smiled, though his circuits were exhausted. "Just doing my part, Optimus, just doing my part." The comms line went silent, and Bumblebee stood alone in the aftermath of the battle. The skies above Cybertron were clear once more, and the timeline had been restored. But Bumblebee knew that as long as Megatron was out there, the fight would never truly be over. With a final glance at the now destroyed chronoconductor, Bumblebee transformed and sped off into the distance. There would be other battles, other missions, but for now, the future was theirs to protect. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sun hung low in the sky over Earth, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The Autobot base sat in a serene moment of peace, a rare occurrence in the ever-raging war with the Decepticons. Optimus Prime stood tall, his metal frame reflecting the fading light as he gazed over the horizon. Behind him, Bumblebee, his loyal friend and most trusted scout, approached with a silent, measured pace. Optimus Bumblebee's voice was tinged with concern. "Do you really think this peace will last?" Optimus turned to face him, his faceplate unreadable. "It never does, Bumblebee. But we must savor these moments. They remind us of what we fight for." Bumblebee nodded, his usual upbeat energy subdued. Optimus noticed, but did deep breath. Bumblebee had been distant lately, quieter than normal, but after all they'd been through, it wasn't too surprising. The war had taken its toll on everyone. Little did Optimus know, this was not the only reason for Bumblebee's behavior. Unbeknownst to the Autobots, a shadow was moving against them. Megatron, hidden deep within his fortress, had been plotting in silence. He had long been searching for a way to destabilize the Autobots, to strike at their very heart, and he had finally found it. A sinister device, pulsing with dark energy, lay before him. Starscream hovered in the background, his usual sarcastic tone barely held back. "You really think that thing will work?" Megatron's crimson optics glowed brighter as he turned towards Starscream. "You doubt my genius?" Starscream cried. His voice was cold and threatening. This device will not only work, it will turn the Autobots' greatest weapon into my own. Starscream sneered but remained silent. He knew better than to challenge Megatron as will at this moment. With a calculated precision, Megatron activated the device and it whirred to life with a low, haunting hum. He had chosen his target carefully, Bumblebee, the one Autobot who could move silently through enemy territory, the one Optimus Prime trusted above all others. If he could turn Bumblebee against the Autobots, chaos would ensue. Hours later, Bumblebee set out on a reconnaissance mission. Optimus had trusted him with a simple scouting task near Decepticon territory. The area had been quiet for too long, and Optimus feared a trap. Bumblebee's yellow frame glided through the desert, his wheels kicking up dust as he approached the Decepticon stronghold. That's when the ambush struck. Before Bumblebee could react, a barrage of lasers hit his sides, throwing him into a spin. His system scrambled, but he quickly regained control and transformed, weapon ready. But it was too late. He was surrounded, and in the midst of the attackers, Megatron appeared, towering over him.
Bumblebee, Megatron's voice oozed with malice. I've been expecting you.
Bumblebee fired at Megatron without hesitation, but his shots were deflected by the Decepticon leader's set of force field. Before he could fire again, a dark shadow swept over him, and he felt his system seize. His optics flickered as the mysterious device hummed ominously, tendrils of energy wrapping around him, penetrating his mind. What are you doing? Bumblebee stammered, his voice glitching as his body betrayed him. Megatron's lips curled into a cruel smile. You'll see soon enough, Bumblebee. Bumblebee fought against the tendrils of control, but it was no use. His body was no longer his own. The world around him dimmed as his will was snuffed out like a candle in a storm. When Bumblebee returned to the Autobot base, no one noticed the difference at first. He moved and spoke like his usual self, but behind his cheerful facade, Megatron's sacked control lingered in the dark corners of his mind. Optimus welcomed him back, relieved that the mission had been uneventful. Days passed and strange things began to happen. Autobots found their operations mysteriously compromised. Communications were intercepted, supply routes sabotaged. Optimus grew suspicious, but the idea that one of his own might be responsible never crossed his mind until Bumblebee's sad behavior became too hard to ignore. During a particularly dangerous mission, Bumblebee's actions almost led to the team's destruction. Optimus had given him a clear order, but Bumblebee had hesitated, allowing the Decepticons to launch a devastating counterattack. Afterward, Ratchet pulled Optimus aside, his voice low. Optimus, something's wrong with Bumblebee. Optimus shook his head. He's been through a lot. Ratchet, we all have. Maybe it's just trap. No, Ratchet insisted. This is different. His system's there, something off. I think Megatron's done something to him. The words hung in the air like a thick fog wrapping around Optimus' thought. Could Megatron have somehow tampered with Bumblebee? The idea was almost too painful to bear, but the signs were there, clear as day. Optimus called a private meeting with the core team: Ratchet, RSS, Ironhide, and Prowl. Together, they discussed the strange occurrences surrounding Bumblebee. Ratchet presented his findings, showing subtle but undeniable changes in Bumblebee and neural pattern. He's still being controlled, Ratchet concluded grimly. It's the only explanation. Optimus' face was a mask of stoic resolve, but inside his spark ached. Bumblebee was like a son to him, one of his most trusted companions. If Megatron had indeed taken control of him, they would need to act fast. Ironhide, always blunt and pragmatic, spoke first. We need to take him down, Optimus. If he said working for Megatron, there's no telling what damage he will do. No, RC countered sharply. We can't just give up on him like that. There has to be a way to save him. Optimus raised his hand, silencing them both. We will not abandon Bumblebee. But we must be prepared for the worst. Ratchet, is there a way to reverse this control? Ratchet hesitated maybe, but I need more data. I need to get close to Bumblebee, access his systems directly. That Starsky Prowl noted. If he's under Megatron's control, he could turn on us at any moment. I know, Ratchet admitted, but it's all the way. Optimus stood, towering over the group. His voice was heavy with the weight of leadership. Then we'll do whatever it takes. Bumblebee is one of us. We'll bring him back, no matter the cost. The hunt for Bumblebee began that night. He had left the base under the guise of another mission, but this time, the Autobots knew the truth. He wasn't trusting on his own. He was following Megatron's orders, and the Autobots were determined to stop him before he could cause further harm. As they tracked Bumblebee through a dense forest on the outskirts of the city, tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Ironhide gripped his weapon tightly, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of their former ally. "Do we have a plan, Archie?" asked her voice barely above a whisper. "Find him, subdue him, and give Ratchet time to work," Optimus replied. His optics flickered with determination, though his heart was heavy. He didn't want to fight Bumblebee, but if it came down to it, he would do what was necessary to save him. They found Bumblebee in a clearing, standing eerily still, his yellow frame gleaming in the moonlight. His optics glowed faintly, but there was no sign of the familiar spark that once filled him with life. Optimus stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Bumblebee, can you hear me?" Bumblebee said, head tilted slightly, as if considering the question, then without warning, he lunged. The attack was swift, brutal, and unlike anything the Autobots had ever seen from their friend. Bumblebee moved with a precision and lethality that could only be attributed to Megatron's influence. His strikes were calculated, aimed to disable, not kill. Optimus fought defensively, blocking each of Bumblebee's blows, while trying to reach the real Bumblebee buried deep beneath Megatron's self-control. "Bumblebee, this isn't Terry," Optimus shouted, his voice ringing through the clearing. "Fight it." Bumblebee hesitated for a brief moment, his optics flickering, but then the control tightened once more and he attacked with renewed vigor. Ironhide fired a warning shot, barely missing Bumblebee's side. "We don't have time for this, Prime. We need to take him down now." "Wait," Ratchet cried, "give me a chance." With a burst of speed, Ratchet rushed toward Bumblebee, dodging his attacks as he reached out to access Bumblebee's internal system. Ratchet moved quickly, his tools already humming as he tried to connect to Bumblebee's inner system. Bumblebee lashed out, nearly catching him with a powerful strike, but Optimus intercepted the blow, shielding Ratchet just long enough for him to establish the link. Ratchet's optics narrowed in concentration as he worked trying to access the core of the mind control device embedded deep within Bumblebee. "Just a little longer," Ratchet muttered, beads of stress showing in his face as Bumblebee fought back with unrelenting force. Every second felt like an eternity. Optimus struggled to keep Bumblebee at bay without hurting him. The punches exchanged between them weren't lethal, but each hit rattled his frame, making it harder to keep his balance. The pain wasn't just physical, it ran deeper, a wound in his spark as he watched Bumblebee, his friend, attacking him with an unyielding intensity that wasn't Terry's own. Arceus and Ironhide flanked Bumblebee, ready to step in if things went too far. Arceus's blasters were primed, but she hesitated. Bumblebee had been one of them for so long. To fight him like this was almost unthinkable. Bumblebee swung a fist toward Ratchet, knocking away one of his tools, but Ratchet quickly scrambled to retrieve it. "I am almost there. Just hold him off." Optimus blocked another strike, then grappled with Bumblebee, locking arms as they fought. "Bumblebee, listen to me. You can fight this. You have to fight it." For a moment, Bumblebee faltered, his optics flickered, the glow dimming slightly. A brief pause, barely perceptible, but it was enough for Ratchet. He seized the opening and sensed a surge of energy through his connection to Bumblebee's systems, disrupting the flow of Megatron's control. A shockwave rippled through Bumblebee's body, and he staggered back, his frame twitching as conflicting commands battled within him. Optimus stepped forward again, his voice filled with hope. "You're stronger than this, Bumblebee. You've always been strong. Don't let him control you." Bumblebee let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a growl and a groan as his internal systems fought against themselves. Ratchet's countermeasure was working, but it wasn't Turi enough. Megatron's control ran deeper than they had anticipated. Suddenly, Bumblebee's optics locked onto Optimus, and for a split second, something flickered within them, something familiar, something like the old Bumblebee. But then just as quickly, the darkness surged back and Bumblebee roared in defiance, breaking free from Optimus' grip. His movements became more erratic, more violent. It was as if Megatron's device, sensing its control slipping, was tightening its grip with renewed fury. Optimus braced himself for another attack, but Bumblebee hesitated again, his hands trembling as if struggling to follow through. Ratchet seized the moment and activated the final sequence of his override program. "Now, Ratchet!" shouted. A powerful surge of energy rippled through Bumblebee's frame, causing him to drop to one knee. He clutched his head as the tendrils of Megatron's control slowly unraveled. His optics flickered, the red glow dimming, replaced by the soft blue light that had once been a symbol of his loyalty. Optimus cautiously approached Bumblebee. Bumblebee remained on the ground, breathing heavily as if his systems were struggling to recalibrate. His voice came out in a hoarse, broken tone. Optimus, I didn't mean to. It sounds okay, Optimus said softly, kneeling beside him. You're so back now, you with us. Bumblebee and his optics locked onto Optimus, the guilt and pain in his gaze unmistakable. I hurt you. I hurt all of you. I couldn't stop it. Optimus placed a hand on Bumblebee's shoulder, the weight of it both reassuring and firm. You weren't to yourself, Bumblebee. None of this was your fault. The forest around them grew still as the tension began to fade. Arceus and Ironhide lowered their weapons, relief evident in their body language. Though the emotional toll was still raw, Bumblebee had returned, but at what cost? Ratchet stepped forward, his tools still buzzing with the remnants of energy from the procedure. The device that Megatron implanted in Bumblebee is destroyed. He won't be able to control him anymore. Bumblebee shook his head, still haunted by what he'd done. But I let him in. I couldn't fight it. Optimus cut him off gently. You fought as hard as you could. That's all any of us can do. For a long moment, they stood there in the stillness of the forest, each of them processing what had just happened. Bumblebee had been saved, but the damage done would linger both to him and to the Autobots as a whole. Back at the base, the atmosphere was somber, despite their success. Bumblebee had been repaired physically, but the emotional scars were deep. He kept his distance from the others, his usual optimism dulled by the weight of his guilt. He couldn't stop replaying the moments in his mind, the times when he'd attacked his friends, had betrayed them even though he hadn't wanted to. Optimus watched him from a distance, knowing that this wound would take time to heal. Bumblebee wasn't just any soldier. He was a symbol of everything the Autobots fought for: the courage, the loyalty, the spirit of never giving up. If Megatron had succeeded in breaking him, what hope did they have? Ratchet approached Optimus, his tone cautious. He's stable. But it's gonna take time. Megatron's device did more than just control him. It broke something inside. Optimus nodded, his optics dark with thought. We'll give him that time. He deserves it. But Megatron wasn't done yet. In his fortress, far from the Autobot base, Megatron stood before a series of monitors, watching as his plan unraveled. Bumblebee had broken free, and the Autobots had survived yet another of his schemes. But this was merely a setback. The device he had used on Bumblebee had been a prototype, an experiment. He turned to Starscream, who was smirking from the shadows. It appears your plan didn't work after all, Megatron. Megatron's house optics flared with anger, but he remained composed. On the contrary, Starscream, this was merely the beginning. The device I used on Bumblebee was but a first step. Starscream tilted his head, his curiosity piqued. A first step. Megatron nodded, his lips curling into a sinister grin. Bumblebee may have escaped this time, but I now know the full extent of the Autobots' weaknesses. They will not be so fortunate next time. He turned to the console in front of him, inputting a series of commands on the screen. Schematics for a new device appeared larger, more powerful, and far more dangerous. This war is far from over, Megatron said, his voice dripping with malevolence. And when the time comes, I will break them all. Back at the Autobot base, Bumblebee stood in front of the large, open hangar, staring out at the sky. The stars twinkled above, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the battles still to come. But for now, the only battle he was fighting was the one within himself. Optimus approached, standing beside him in silence for a moment before speaking. You'll heal, Bumblebee, Optimus said softly. It will take time, but you will find your way back. Bumblebee didn't respond immediately, his optics still focused on the stars. I don't know if I can ever be the same. Optimus placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. None of us are the same after this war, but we keep moving forward together. Bumblebee finally turned to look at him, the weight of his emotions evident in his expression. Thank you, Optimus. They stood there in silence, the stars above them shining down like silent witnesses to the ongoing struggle. But even in the quiet, there was a sense of hope. A hope that despite everything they would endure. As the night stretched on, Bumblebee felt the faint stirrings of that hope within himself. He wasn't whole yet, but maybe, just maybe, he could be. And as long as he had Optimus and the other Autobots by his side, he knew that no matter what Megatron threw at them next, they would face it together. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The underground caverns echoed with a distant hum of ancient Cybertronian mechanisms, long forgotten by both time and war. Bumblebee's yellow armor gleamed under the faint light of his optics as he led his small squad deeper into the ruin. Every step he took sent a wave of nostalgia through him. These ruins felt like a piece of home, yet they were buried on Earth, a planet the Autobots had sworn to protect. Windblade moved silently beside him, her wings folded close to her back as her crimson and white frame navigated the narrow pathway. She had always been more than a warrior. She was a strategist, a leader in her own right. But here, deep in the ruins, she followed Bumblebee's silhouette. Ironhide, bringing up the rear, glanced around warily, his powerful cannons ready to blast anything that posed a threat. The tightness in his voice reflected his unease. "I don't like this place," he muttered. "No one does," Bumblebee replied, keeping his voice low, "but Megatron says here. That size reason enough to be." The mission had been simple in theory: stop Megatron from accessing the core energy hidden in these ruins, an energy source powerful enough to rebuild Cybertron from scratch. But Bumblebee knew nothing was ever simple with Megatron. The Decepticon leader, lust for power, would drive him to tear Earth apart if it meant gaining control of the core. That could not happen. They'd been in the ruins for hours, now weaving through crumbling tunnels and hidden traps. The further they went, the more the ancient architecture began to resemble the majestic structures of old Cybertron, sharp, angular designs that carried a haunting elegance. In some ways, it felt like they were walking through a graveyard, the remnants of a once great civilization now reduced to forgotten ruin. "Any sign of them yet?" Bumblebee asked, his voice crackling over the team. Secure comm. Windblade scanned the area ahead with her optics, her wings twitching as she sensed something. "No Decepticons, but I am picking up movement. Might be some automated defenses. Be ready." Ironhide grinned, his massive fists clenching. "I am always ready." Suddenly, the floor beneath them rumbled, and the ground split open. From the chasm, tall, spindly machines arose ancient Cybertronian sentinels that had once guarded the ruins with a deadly precision. Their optics glowed a menacing red as they zeroed in on the intruder. "Looks like we've got company," Ironhide bellowed, raising his cannons and firing a barrage of shot. The sentinels responded with blinding speed, dodging most of the blasts and firing back with their own energy weapon. Bumblebee dodged the incoming fire, transforming into his sleek Camaro form to gain speed. He zipped between the sentinels, forcing them to adjust their aim. Windblade took to the air, her sword flashing as she cut through the machines with deadly precision. Ironhide, never one to back down from a fight, charged head-on into the fray, his massive cannons laying waste to any sentinel that dared come too close. Despite their power, the sentinels were relentless, and for everyone they took down, two more seemed to rise from the shadow. Bumblebee's tires screeched as he transformed back into robot form, skidding to a halt behind a crumbling pillar for cover. "We were wasting time here," he shouted over the comms. "Megatron seal cruddy ahead of us. We need to get to the core before he does." Windblade swooped down, slicing through the last sentinel standing in her way. "Agreed, let's move before we get bogged down in more of these things." Ironhide grunted as he blasted the final sentinel into a heap of smoldering scrap. "I say bring him on, but yeah, we've got bigger fish to fry." The team pressed forward, leaving the ruins of the sentinels behind them. The deeper they went, the more they could feel the energy of the core pulsating through the walls. It was close, and so was Megatron. As they approached a massive set of doors carved with intricate Cybertronian symbols, Bumblebee raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. "This is it," he whispered, his optics narrowing. "The core is just beyond these doors." Windblade stepped forward, running her fingers along the ancient symbol. "They were warnings," she said, her voice quiet. "It says the core is too powerful to be controlled by any one being." Ironhide scoffed. That scent never stopped Megatron before. Before Bumblebee could respond, the doors groaned open with a deafening screech. On the other side, standing in the middle of the massive chamber, was Megatron himself, his towering frame bathed in the eerie glow of the core energy. Bumblebee's sparks sank. They were too late. Megatron's ice crimson optics glared down at them, a cruel smile forming on his face. Bumblebee, he rumbled, his voice dripping with malice. How fitting that you should witness the dawn of a new Cybertron 1 that will rise from the ashes of this pitiful planet. Bumblebee stepped forward, his fists clenched. I won. Try and let you take it, Megatron. This power was never meant for you. Megatron's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound that made the ground tremble. You stop me, you re nothing but a child playing at war, Bumblebee. I will reshape Cybertron in my image, and no one, not even you, can stand in my way. Before Bumblebee could react, Shockwave appeared from the shadows, his single optic glowing as he analyzed the core. The energy is nearly at full capacity, Lord Megatron, he said, his voice cold and detached. Once it is stabilized, we can begin the reconstruction. Windblade unsheathed her blade, her wings flaring as she readied herself for the inevitable fight. We need to take them down now, Bumblebee, she said, her voice tense. If they activate that core. I know, Bumblebee replied, his optics locking onto Megatron. We won. 3. Let the... With a battle cry, Bumblebee charged at Megatron, his fists ready to strike. Windblade and Ironhide followed suit, engaging Shockwave and the Decepticon forces that had begun to flood the chamber. The fight was brutal. Megatron met Bumblebee's and attacked with a ferocity that only years of battle could hone. Their fists clashed, sending shockwaves through the chamber. Each hit from Megatron was a reminder of his sheer power, but Bumblebee refused to back down. He ducked and weaved, using his agility to his advantage, landing blow after blow on Megatron's massive frame. Meanwhile, Windblade danced through the battlefield, her sword cutting through Decepticon soldiers with precision. But Shockwave was no ordinary foe. His cold, calculating nature made him a deadly opponent. As Windblade clashed with him, she realized that every move she made was being analyzed, countered before she could even complete it. Ironhide, true to his nature, took the brunt of the Decepticon assault. His cannons roared as he blasted through waves of enemies, but even he knew they were fighting a losing battle. The Decepticons were too many, and Megatron's Saw's forces seemed endless. As the battle raged on, the core pulsed with an increasing intensity. Shockwave, despite being engaged in battle, managed to manipulate the ancient controls of the core chess energy chamber. The air began to hum with raw, untapped power. Bumblebee and his optics flickering from the strain of battle glanced at the core. They were running out of time. We need to stop that core. Now, Bumblebee shouted, dodging a crushing blow from Megatron and Windblade. Cover me. Without hesitation, Windblade disengaged from her fight with Shockwave and flew towards Bumblebee. Together, they rushed towards the core, dodging energy blasts and debris as the chamber began to collapse around them. But Megatron was far from finished. With a roar of rage, he lunged at Bumblebee, his fusion cannon primed to fire. You won't stop me, Autobot. Megatron bellowed, his massive hand reaching out to crush Bumblebee. Windblade, moving faster than a heartbeat, intercepted the blow, her sword clashing against Megatron's armored fist. Go, Bumblebee, she shouted, holding her ground as sparks flew from the collision. Thierry, I'll handle him. Bumblebee didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted towards the core, the energy pulsing louder and brighter with every step. Shockwave was already at the control panel, his optic narrowing as he saw Bumblebee approaching. You're too late, Audiobook, Shockwave said, his voice devoid of emotion. The core will activate, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Bumblebee gritted his teeth and leaped at Shockwave, tackling him away from the control. The two bots tumbled across the chamber, exchanging blows as they fought for control of the core. But Bumblebee knew he didn't have much time. The core's energy was reaching critical level. With a final burst of strength, Bumblebee knocked Shockwave aside and slammed his hand onto the control panel. He didn't know exactly what he was doing, but he had to try something, anything to stop the core from detonating. Suddenly, the entire chamber was bathed in a blinding light. The core's energy surged. The blinding light surged outward, filling every corner of the ancient chamber as the core's energy pulsed, growing hotter and more unstable with each passing second. Bumblebee shielded his optics, feeling the heat and pressure rising in the air around him. His system screamed warnings in his head as the core spiraled out of control. He could hear Megatron roaring in the background, but everything around him was a blur. There was only one thing left to do. With a desperate lunge, Bumblebee reached out and jammed his hand into the core's interface, overriding the ancient control system. The energy seared through his circuits, sending shockwaves of pain through his body, but he held on, forcing his way through the encrypted Cybertronian code. His optics flickered as his systems began to fail from the strain, but he pushed forward, knowing that if he didn't everything Earth, Cybertron, the entire universe would be at risk. Behind him, the battle between Windblade and Megatron continued to rage. Windblade fought with a grace and ferocity that belied her slender frame, her sword flashing as she parried Megatron's sense brutal strike. But even she was struggling against the Decepticon leader, Sen, overwhelming power. Each of Megatron's blows was like a thunderclap, shaking the chamber and forcing her back step by step. She could feel her energy reserves depleting, but she couldn't afford to fall, not now, not with so much at stake. Megatron's crimson optics gleamed with fury as he swung his massive arm toward her, aiming to crush her once and for all. "You were nothing but a gnat to me," he snarled, his voice booming through the collapsing chamber. "I will crush you under my heel, and then I will claim the core Sam power for myself." But Windblade wasn't done yet. With a burst of speed, she dodged to the side, using her wings to propel herself out of Megatron's reach. Her sword flashed in the dim light as she struck, scoring a deep cut along Megatron's armor. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it slowed him down, buying Bumblebee the precious seconds he needed. Ironhide, battered and scorched from the endless waves of Decepticons, finally caught up with the other. His massive frame was dented and sparking, but his cannon still glowed with the heat of battle. He took one look at the situation, Bumblebee desperately working to shut down the core, Windblade locked in combat with Megatron, and knew he had to act fast. "Ironhide, cover Bumblebee," Windblade shouted as she ducked another one of Megatron's brutal swings. "He needs time." Ironhide didn't he need to be told. Twice with a roar, he charged forward, blasting through the remaining Decepticon soldiers that had entered the chamber. His cannons thundered, and each shot sent a Decepticon crumpling to the ground. But as strong as Ironhide was, even he could feel the toll the battle had taken on him. He just had to hold out a little longer. Meanwhile, Bumblebee's hand was still fused to the core and interface, his internal system struggling to cope with the sheer amount of energy flooding through him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought his circuits would fry completely. But then finally, the code began to unravel. He could feel the core energy stabilizing, its wild fluctuations calming under his control. His body was screaming in agony, but Bumblebee forced himself to hold on just a little longer. Then, with a final surge, the core's energy dimmed. The bright light that had threatened to engulf the entire chamber began to fade, and the air around them cooled. Bumblebee pulled his hand free from the interface, staggering back as his systems tried to recover from the overload. He had done it. He had stopped the core from detonating. But there was no time to celebrate. Megatron, realizing what had happened, let out a furious roar that echoed through the chamber. His optics blazed with rage as he swung his fusion cannon toward Bumblebee, fully intent on obliterating him where he stood. "Enough of this," Megatron bellowed, his voice shaking the very walls of the ruins. "You will not deny me my victory." Before Megatron could fire, Ironhide barreled into him, slamming his massive body into the Decepticon leader. The impact sent both of them crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and sparking machinery. Ironhide fought with everything he had, but Megatron's strength was overwhelming. Even as Ironhide held him back, Megatron, Sanihand, reached for his fusion cannon, ready to unleash devastation. "Bumblebee now," Windblade shouted as she dove toward the core's control panel, her wings propelling her faster than Megatron could react. Bumblebee, still reeling from the effects of the core's energy, forced himself to his feet. He saw what Windblade was planning and nodded grimly. With Megatron distracted by Ironhide, Bumblebee sprinted toward the interface once more, this time using the controls to activate the ruin's defense system. The chamber shook as ancient Cybertronian mechanisms sprang to life. The floor beneath Megatron and Ironhide split apart, revealing a deep chasm that had been hidden for millennia. Ironhide barely managed to roll out of the way, but Megatron still focused on his enemies. Didn't he notice until it was too late? The ground crumbled beneath him, and with a furious roar, Megatron tumbled into the abyss, his body crashing into the darkness below. For a moment, there was silence. The Autobots stood frozen, staring at the place where Megatron had disappeared. Then, slowly, the rumbling of the ruins began to quiet. The core's energy was stable, and the ruins' defenses had been triggered. The danger was over for now. Windblade sheathed her sword and turned to Bumblebee, who was leaning heavily against the control panel. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "You stopped the core." Bumblebee gave a weak nod, his system still struggling to recover. "Yeah, but Megatron's not gone. He'll be back. He always finds a way." Ironhide, still panting from the battle, gave a weary chuckle as he rejoined them. "Let him try. We'll be ready for him." Together, the Autobots made their way back toward the surface, leaving the ruins and the core safely sealed behind them. Bumblebee's steps were heavy, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. They had stopped Megatron from claiming the power to rebuild Cybertron, and for now, Earth was safe. As they emerged into the light of day, Bumblebee looked up at the sky, his optics narrowing. Megatron's threat was far from over, and the battle for Cybertron and Earth would continue. But for now, they had won. And no matter what came next, Bumblebee knew he would be ready. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The stars flickered, but not in their usual rhythmic dance. The galaxy had always been a symphony of constellations and celestial wonders, each planet a note in the grand scale of existence. Yet now something was wrong. The stars no longer shone with their familiar light. They shimmered in and out of view as if reality itself was beginning to fray. Bumblebee sped through a deserted canyon on a distant barren moon. The dust kicked up behind him and his tires roared as he pushed the limits of his speed. His mission was simple, reconnaissance, but the uneasy gnawing at him told him there was more to this than a simple scouting trip. His optics scanned the horizon as he neared the Decepticon stronghold. "Bumblebee report," Optimus Prime's voice came through the comlink, steady and commanding as always. "Still no sign of activity, but I am getting strange energy reading something set off." Optimus paused. "Stay vigilant. If Megatron is behind this, the threat could be far greater than we anticipated." Bumblebee's sex engine revved as he transformed, landing lightly on his feet just outside the stronghold. The structure loomed above him, a hulking mass of twisted metal and dark energy. His scanners buzzed with erratic signals, confirming his suspicions this wasn't just a bait. Something inside was warping the very fabric of reality. He crept forward, using the shadows to his advantage. Inside the base, Megatron stood at the center of a vast chamber, a wicked grin splitting his metallic face. Before him, suspended in a pulsing beam of light, was the galactic shard, a relic of unimaginable power. Around him, the air shimmered and rippled as if space itself was bending under the shard, Seth's influence. "Soon, this galaxy will belong to me," Megatron muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "Each dimension split apart, isolated, and under my control." Soundwave, ever the loyal strategist, stood by his side. "The rift's set power is unstable. Lord Megatron, it could tear the galaxy apart beyond even your control." Megatron turned sharply, his red optics burning. "I control the rift. No one else. Soon all will kneel before me." Bumblebee ducked behind a pillar, his servos trembling slightly. He had to get this information back to Optimus. The fate of the entire galaxy was at stake, and they were running out of time. He activated his comlink again, whispering, "Optimus, you are not going to believe this." Megatron's got his hands on something called the Galactic Shard. "It's tearing dimensions apart. He plans to split the galaxy." There was a brief silence on the other end, then Optimus' voice, colder and more focused than before, came through. "Return to base immediately. We need to prepare." Bumblebee turned to leave, but the sound of approaching footsteps stopped him in his track. Decepticon patrols, his mind raced, calculating his options. He could fight his way out, but the odds were stacked against him. Stealth was his best bet. As the patrol passed, Bumblebee darted from shadow to shadow, his movements quick and precise. Every step brought him closer to the exit, and with each second, the weight of the situation bore down heavier on his shoulders. He needed to warn the others before it was too late. He transformed once again, tires squealing as he sped away from the Decepticon base. Dust and debris flew in his wake as he raced through the desolate landscape. The stars above him flickered again, more violently this time. The rift had already begun to open. Back at the Autobot base, Optimus Prime stood over a holographic map of the galaxy, his optics scanning the ever-growing rift that now spread across star systems. Ratchet, their medic and technical genius, worked furiously at a console, pulling up data as quickly as his hands could move. "This is worse than we feared," Ratchet muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. "The rift is spreading faster than anticipated. If we don't stop it soon, the galaxy will be torn into countless dimensions, each one isolated from the other, communication, travel it, will all be impossible. Optimus nodded gravely. We need a plan, and fast. If Megatron succeeds, everything we've fought for will be undone. The base doors slid open and Bumblebee hurried in, his usually upbeat demeanor darkened by the severity of the situation. I saw it with my own optics, Optimus Bumblebee said, his voice urgent. Megatron's got that shard, and it's sense already messing with reality. We need to move now. Optimus turned to Ratchet, his face as resolute as ever. Can we stop the rift? Ratchet hesitated in theory. Yes, but we do need to get to the heart of the rift and use its own energy against it. That's easier said than done. The rift is unstable, one wrong move, and it could implode, taking half the galaxy with it. Optimus placed a hand on Bumblebee's shoulder. We have a choice. Megatron has forced our hand. We will stop him, no matter the cost. As the Autobots prepared for their mission, the rift continued to widen. Entire planets vanished into its maw, swallowed by the unstable dimensions forming within the galaxy. The stars themselves seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as if they too were being torn apart by the rift scene pull. Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, and a select team of Autobots boarded their ship, the Ark, and set course for the rift's epicenter. As they flew through space, the tension was palpable. Each Autobot knew the gravity of the mission. They were no longer just fighting for Cybertron, they were fighting for the entire galaxy. The Ark's engines hummed as they approached the rift. The space around it was distorted, twisting into strange, unfamiliar patterns. Planets, stars, and debris floated in and out of view as if they existed in multiple dimensions at once. It was a chaotic, disorienting sight. Ratchet worked quickly at his station, running calculations and monitoring the rift's instability. They'll have to be precise, he said. One wrong move, and the rift could tear us apart. Optimus Prime stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the swirling chaos ahead. We'll succeed, Ratchet. We must. As the Ark neared the rift, the ship shuddered, its systems struggling to handle the gravitational forces pulling at it from all directions. Bumblebee gripped the controls tightly, his optics focused on the task at hand. Suddenly, a warning light flashed on the console. Incoming Decepticon forces, Bumblebee shouted. Megatron's fleet emerged from the rift, their ships crackling with dark energy. At the head of the fleet was Megatron himself, his flagship an imposing behemoth of metal and weaponry. Autobots, Megatron. His voice boomed over the comms filled with malice. You are too late. The galaxy is already mine. Surrender, and perhaps I will spare your life. Optimus Prime's optics narrowed. We will never surrender, Megatron. We will stop you. So be it. Megatron snarled. Then you will die with the rest of the galaxy. The battle erupted in an instant. The Ark weaved and dodged through the barrage of Decepticon fire, returning shots with precision. Explosions lit up the darkened sky as ships on both sides were torn apart by the violent conflict. Amid the chaos, Bumblebee maneuvered the Ark closer to the rift's core. We almost there, he called out, just a little further. But Megatron wasn't trying to let them reach the rift so easily. His flagship unleashed a devastating blast of energy aimed directly at the Ark. Optimus Prime gritted his teeth, gripping the controls brace for impact. The blast hit the Ark with tremendous force, sending it spiraling through space. Systems malfunctioned, and alarms blared as the ship struggled to regain control. Smoke filled the bridge as Bumblebee wrestled with the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. The Ark spun wildly, the rift's gravitational pull intensifying every second. Ratchet worked furiously at his console, rerouting power to the stabilizer. We were losing altitude fast, Bumblebee shouted over the alarm. Optimus Prime held steady, his massive frame unshaken despite the chaos around him. Hold it together. Bumblebee, we must reach the core. With a final grunt of effort, Bumblebee corrected the Ark's course, pulling it out of the spin. The ship steadied, but the damage was done. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, indicating several critical systems were on the verge of failure. Shields are down to 30%, Ratchet warned, his voice tense. We can take another hit like that. Optimus nodded grimly. We won, me too. We were almost there. Outside the ship, the rift's swirling energy grew more intense, the gravitational forces warping the very fabric of space. Dimensional tears appeared like jagged wounds, distorting reality around them. Through the chaos, the glowing core of the rift loomed ahead, pulsating with raw, uncontrollable power. Optimus Bumblebee said, his voice tight with concern. They regaining on us? Optimus's optics narrowed. Ratchet, is the plan ready? Ratchet glanced at the readouts. We need to get closer to the core, but it's time dangerous. The energy levels are off the charts. If we tap into it wrong, it'll implode, and we'll go down with it. We'll make it, Optimus said. His tone resolute. We have to. The Ark pushed forward, its engines straining under the gravitational pressure. Ahead of them, the core of the rift twisted and shimmered, a swirling vortex of colors and light, expanding and contracting in unpredictable waves. As they approached, the ship's hull groaned under the immense stress. Just as they neared the core, Megatron saw its voice cut through the currents once again. You should have stayed out of this, Prime. Now you will witness the fall of the galaxy, and your Autobots will die with it. Optimus met Megatron as challenge with a calm determination. You will never control this galaxy, Megatron. You cannot tear it apart for your own greed. We'll see, Megatron sneered. Before Optimus could respond, Megatron's flagship fired another massive energy blast. The Ark lurched as it was hit, systems shorting out in sparks and smoke. The ship careened toward the core, out of control. We were going down, Bumblebee shouted, pulling hard on the control. Brace yourselves, Optimus ordered. The Ark plunged toward the core, but instead of being torn apart by the raw energy, the ship was enveloped in a strange, almost tranquil light. Time seemed to slow as they passed through the vortex, the distorted space around them fading into an eerie stillness. For a moment, everything was silent. Bumblebee blinked, his sensors adjusting. What just happened? Ratchet stared at his console, bewildered. We were inside the rift. Optimus rose from his seat, his optics scanning the surreal, ethereal landscape outside the viewport. This is the heart of the dimensional rift. The core wasn't like anything they had expected. Instead of a chaotic storm of energy, it was a calm, almost serene void where dimensions overlapped and coexisted. Stars and planets from different realities flickered in and out of view, existing for a moment, before disappearing again. It was a place where time and space had no meaning. We need to act fast, Ratchet said, breaking the silence. If we don't destabilize the rift, from in here it will collapse and take everything with it. Optimus nodded. Bumblebee, Ratchet, follow my lead. We will need to work together to channel the rift, sense energy, and close it for good. As they began their delicate task of tapping into the rifts, an energy Megatron, the flagship burst through the vortex, its jagged silhouette casting an ominous shadow across the void. The Decepticon leader wasn't too far behind. Megatron transformed, landing heavily on the surface of the Ark. You think you can stop me, Prime? This rift belongs to me. Optimus stepped forward, his stance firm. Your thirst for power will destroy everything. Megatron, I cannot allow that. Megatron sneered, his arm transforming into a cannon. Then we settle this once and for all. Without another word, Megatron fired. Optimus dodged, rolling to the side as the blast tore through the Ark's hull. The two leaders clashed, metal against metal, their battle echoing through the empty space of the rift. Each strike sent ripples through the unstable dimensions, threatening to collapse the delicate balance of the rift. Bumblebee and Ratchet worked furiously, diverting the rift's energy into a controlled flow. But the longer the battle between Optimus and Megatron raged, the more unstable the core became. Dimensional fissures opened around them, sucking in debris and energy. The galaxy itself was at risk of tearing apart. We were running out of time. Ratchet yelled over the noise of the collapsing dimension. Optimus knew they couldn't defeat Megatron through sheer force. As much as it pained him, he had to make a choice to stop Megatron. He would need to trap him in the rift. Megatron, Optimus shouted, stepping back from the fight. You want this rift? Take it. Before Megatron could react, Optimus grabbed hold of the rift, Synergy directing it toward his foe. The raw power of the rift enveloped Megatron, pulling him toward the unstable core. No, Megatron roared, struggling against the force. I want to be beaten like this. But it was too late. The rift consumed him, dragging him into the vortex of colliding dimension. His screams echoed through the void as he was pulled deeper and deeper into the dimensional chaos, until finally he was gone. The rift began to collapse in on itself, but with Bumblebee and Ratchet's careful work, they were able to stabilize it just in time. The vortex shrank, the dimensions merging back into place, restoring the balance of the galaxy. Optimus stood at the edge of the rift, watching as the final traces of Megatron's presence disappeared. His frame slumped slightly, the weight of the battle and the war heavy on his shoulder. We did it, Bumblebee said, his voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. Optimus turned to face his team. The galaxy is safe for now. But his voice was somber, for he knew that Megatron's hunger for power could never be truly extinguished. Somewhere in some fractured dimension, his enemies still lingered, waiting for the chance to rise again. As the Ark powered up its engines and began its journey back to Cybertron, the stars outside flickered back to their steady, familiar glow. The rift was sealed, but the scars of the battle would remain. In the stillness of space, far from the remnants of the rift, a faint energy pulsed, a reminder that some battles never truly end. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The scorching wind of the desolate planet scoured the surface, kicking up dust and remnants of a recent battle. The horizon stretched out like a barren wasteland, littered with the ruins of Cybertronian and alien technology. Smoke curled from the remains of once mighty warriors, now broken and lifeless. Megatron stirred, his servos whining in protest as he slowly regained consciousness. His optics flickered, adjusting to the dim reddish light that filtered through the planet's atmosphere. The first thing he noticed was the silence. No radio chatter, no sounds of war, just the eerie quiet of the battlefield. His processors whirred as he tried to recall what had happened. The last memory was of leading his Decepticons into a ferocious battle against the Autobots when, without warning, the skies had darkened and a powerful explosion had torn through both factions. Megatron rose, his massive frame looming over the broken landscape, his crimson optics scanning for signs of life. He activated his internal comms, but there was no response. His Decepticons were gone, either destroyed or captured. As he took a step forward, his foot crushed the remains of a drone, its design unfamiliar. It was not of Autobot or Decepticon origin. Something else had been involved in this ambush.
Who dares? Megatron growled, his deep, resonant voice dripping with fury.
Whoever had dared to interfere with his plans would pay dearly. A sudden sound caught his attention, and he whirled around, cannon at the ready. From the shadows of a nearby wreck, a smaller figure emerged, yellow and black armor, scuffed but unmistakable. Bumblebee staggered forward, his movement slow and hesitant, but his optics burned with the same determination Megatron had come to despise over countless battles. "You," Megatron snarled, his cannon priming air of course. An Autobot would crawl from the wreckage. How fitting that you will be the first to fall by my hand. Bumblebee didn't flinch, though. He was clearly at a disadvantage. His weapon systems were damaged, his mobility compromised, yet he stood his ground. "I'm not here to fight you, Megatron," he said, his voice modulated through the damaged vocalizer. "Stir not now." "Then prepare to be destroyed," Megatron sneered, charging his cannon. But before he could fire, the ground beneath them trembled. From the distance, a swarm of alien drones, similar to the one Megatron had crushed, descended upon them, their eerie insectoid frames moving with lethal precision. The Viscounts had returned. "Not now," Bumblebee repeated more urgently this time, raising his arm to fire a few desperate shots at the approaching drone. Megatron hesitated for a fraction of a second, his tactical mind calculating the new threat. The Viscounts, a species he had heard whispers of but never encountered, were not something to be taken lightly. These creatures had attacked both Autobots and Decepticons indiscriminately, meaning they had no allegiance. For the first time in a long while, Megatron faced an enemy that threatened both factions equally. "Fine," he growled, lowering his cannon over, "but only until these pests are exterminated." The uneasy truce hung in the air as they fought side by side. Bumblebee moved with agility, darting between the wreckage, using the terrain to his advantage, despite his damaged state. He fired precise shots, disabling the drones' control nodes, while Megatron, as sheer power decimated anything in his path, his cannon blasting through the waves of Viscountian forces. The battle raged for what felt like hours, the landscape around them becoming even more desolate with each explosion. Finally, as the last drone fell in a heap of twisted metal, silence returned. Both Megatron and Bumblebee stood amidst the wreckage, their armor scorched but still functional. Bumblebee glanced at Megatron warily, knowing their alliance was temporary at best. "We need to figure out what those things are and how to stop them," Megatron scoffed. There is no Scifiaudiobooks. The only reason you're still functioning is because I haven't decided to finish you off yet." "Look around," Bumblebee countered, his voice strained but firm. Has no one else left? You're Decepticons. My team, they were either captured or dead. If we keep fighting each other, we're gonna end up the same way. Megatron's optics flared with anger, but Bumblebee pause resonated with a cold logic he couldn't ignore. He hated to admit it, but the Autobot was right. The Vicons were a threat that neither of them could face alone, and continuing their war here would only result in mutual destruction. Very well, Megatron said, his voice low and menacing. But make no mistake, Autobot. When this is over, our truce ends. Bumblebee nodded. I wouldn't expect anything left. The two unlikely allies began their journey across the desolate planet, moving cautiously through the debris-strewn landscape. The planet itself was a graveyard of past battles with the skeletons of massive war machines lying half buried in the ground, their rusted forms a stark reminder of the endless conflict between Autobots and Decepticons. Now, however, those machines were nothing more than obstacles in their path, a testament to the futility of their ancient war in the face of this new enemy. As they traveled, Bumblebee scanners picked up energy signatures ahead. There's something up ahead, he said, his voice tense. It's not Autoboot or Decepticon tech. Then it must be the Viencans, Herr Megatron replied. Hurrays, let's see what these parasites are hiding. They crept closer, using the jagged landscape as cover. In the distance, they saw a massive structure, clearly Varishun and Erigen. The alien architecture was sleek and ominous, pulsing with an unnatural glow. Drones patrolled the perimeter, but the structure's true purpose remained hidden. Megatron studied the building for a moment, his tactical mind already formulating a plan. We need to get inside and find out what these creatures are planning. If they were using Cybertronian energy for their own purposes, they will regret it. Bumblebee frowned, his distrust of Megatron ever present. Tarek, after that you plan to use whatever you find against us, don't you? That is none of your concern, Autobot and Megatron replied coldly. But for now, your survival depends on my success. Remember that? With no other options, Bumblebee begrudgingly followed Megatron's lead as they made their way toward the Vicon structure. The tension between them was palpable, but both knew they couldn't afford to let their rivalry interfere. Not yet. They reached the outer wall of the alien compound, and Bumblebee activated a small Emperor device, temporarily disabling the nearby drones. True, that I'll buy us some time. Trek, he whispered. Drake, but not much. Megatron nodded, impressed by the Autobot's resourcefulness despite himself. Terran and let Sen not waste any of it. They moved through the shadows, avoiding detection as they infiltrated the compound. Inside, the atmosphere was even more oppressive, with strange machinery humming ominously around them. The deeper they went, the more apparent it became that the Vicons were harvesting something sparks, the lifeblood of Cybertronian. Bumblebee stopped in his tracks, his optics widening in horror as he saw rows of containment pods, each one holding a faintly glowing spark. They were draining us to power their weapon. Megatron's fists clenched in rage. Those parasites dare steal the essence of Cybertron for their own use. They will pay for this. Bumblebee's gaze hardened. We have to stop them together. For the first time, Megatron didn't argue. There was no room for posturing or grandstanding. The Vicons had crossed a line that could not be ignored, and even Megatron's thirst for conquest was dwarfed by his fury at seeing Cybertronians reduced to mere fuel for another species' war machine. Together they moved deeper into the heart of the Vivon facility. The closer they got to the center, the more heavily guarded the area became. Alien guards and drones patrolled the halls, their presence a constant threat. Bumblebee signaled for a halt, pressing himself against the cold metal wall. We were getting close, he said in a hushed voice fumingly. There's a control room ahead. If we can shut down their systems, we might be able to release the spark. Megatron's optics narrowed as he scanned the area. Then, let's not waste time. They charged forward in unison, Bumblebee's quick reflexes, allowing him to disable the guards while Megatron's sheer power decimated the drone. It was a strange and uneasy harmony, the two of them fighting side by side, each knowing that their temporary alliance would end the moment the Vicon threat was neutralized. But for now, they were unstoppable. They stormed the control room with a force that only two seasoned warriors could muster. Bumblebee was a blur of yellow and black, moving with precision, darting between control panels and alien guard. His blasters hissed as they discharged quick bursts of energy, taking down Vicon drones before they could react. Megatron, a massive force of destruction, followed behind with calculated brutality. His fusion cannon sent waves of devastation through the room, vaporizing anything that stood in his path. Bumblebee disabled the last guard with a quick strike to its central processor. As the alien collapsed, sparks flew and Bumblebee turned his attention to the control panel in the center of the room. He scanned it, quickly deciphering the foreign symbols and accessing the core functions of the base. His optics widened in alarm as the true extent of the Viscount plan became clear. They were not just using the sparks for power, Bumblebee muttered more to himself than to Megatron.
They were trying to weaponize them, turn Cybertronian energy into some kind of super weapon.
If they finish this, it'll make our war look like a playground fight. Megatron, already furious, leaned over Bumblebee's shoulder, his massive form casting a long shadow across the control panel. Bumblebee's servos worked quickly, his fingers flying over the alien control. "I am trying," he said through clenched vocalizers, his systems whirring as he worked to bypass the security protocol. The alien technology was complex, but Bumblebee's tactical mind was sharper than most, and he understood how critical this moment was. Every second that passed was another step closer to disaster. Megatron, pacing behind him, like a caged predator, grew impatient. "If you can't tell, shut it down. I will destroy it myself." "Not yet," Bumblebee snapped. "If we just blow everything up, we might trigger the weapon instead of stopping it. Give me a minute." The seconds dragged on, tension mounting. The entire facility hummed with a dangerous energy, and alarms began to blare, signaling the Vicons were aware of their intrusion. Bumblebee's optics narrowed as he bypassed the last layer of encryption. "Got it," he said, triumphantly slamming his hand down on a control lever. The lights in the room dimmed as the power levels across the facility began to plummet. Megatron grunted in approval, but there was no time to celebrate. "Now we destroy the weapon," he declared, his optics burning with a renewed fury. The Viscount must be made to understand the price of crossing Megatron. Bumblebee's gaze flickered toward the hallway they had come from. "They'll be coming for us," he said, his voice tense. "We need to find the core of this place and end this before they can regroup." The two of them left the control room, moving quickly through the alien facility. The deeper they went, the more hostile the environment became. Viscount drones flooded the corridors, their insect-like forms moving in synchronized patterns, but Megatron and Bumblebee tore through them without hesitation. Their strange, temporary alliance had become a deadly dance, each of them covering the other's sense, weaknesses, even if only for their mutual survival. As they neared the heart of the base, Bumblebee's scanners picked up a massive energy signature just ahead. "That Senate," he said, his voice grim, the weapon. The door to the core chamber slid open with a heavy thud, revealing a massive pulsating device in the center of the room. The machine was unlike anything Bumblebee had ever seen, an amalgamation of alien and Cybertronian technology, powered by the stolen sparks of their fallen comrade. The air around it vibrated with raw energy, and it was clear that the weapon was on the verge of being activated. Megatron stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "It ends here," he declared, his voice like thunder. But before they could move, the floor beneath them rumbled from the shadows. A towering Viscount commander emerged, its frame adorned with shimmering dark armor. Its eyes glowed with a menacing, otherworldly light, and its voice boomed throughout the chamber. "You are too late, Cybertronians," the Viscount commander intoned, its voice a deep, guttural growl. "Your sparks belong to us now. With this weapon, we will harvest your kind until nothing remains." Megatron's optics flared with rage. "I am Megatron, leader of the Decepticons. No one harvests me." The Viscount commander responded with a deep, mocking laugh, raising its weapon, a massive energy blade that hummed with lethal power. "Then die with the rest of your kind." The battle erupted with a ferocity neither had anticipated. The Viscount commander moved with terrifying speed, its energy blade slicing through the air toward Megatron, who barely blocked the attack with his fusion cannon. The clash of energy and metal sent shockwaves through the room, and for the first time in a long while, Megatron found himself facing a foe that truly challenged him. Bumblebees circled the battle, firing precise shots at the Viscount's weak points, but the alien's armor absorbed most of the damage. The Viscount was relentless, pushing Megatron back with each swing of its weapon, sparks flying as the two titans clashed. Megatron, gritting his metal teeth, roared and launched himself forward, slamming his massive fist into the Vicon's chest. The alien stumbled, but it quickly recovered, its energy blade slicing through the air once again. Megatron's fusion cannon discharged a powerful blast at point-blank range, knocking the Vicon back, but it wasn't enough to stop the alien commander. "We need to overload the core," Bumblebee shouted, ducking beneath a wide swing from the Vicon. "The only way to destroy the weapon is from the air." Megatron snarled in response, his optics blazing. "Do what you must, Autobot. I will hold off this abomination." Bumblebee didn't need any further encouragement. He sprinted toward the core, dodging debris and blasts from the Viconeutrons that had started to swarm into the chamber. He reached the massive device, his hands moving quickly over the control console, searching for a way to overload the system. The core was a delicate balance of energy, and it wouldn't take much to push it beyond its limit. Behind him, Megatron continued to battle the Vicon commander, each strike of their weapon sending sparks and debris flying. The floor beneath them cracked under the force of their attacks, and the walls of the chamber trembled. Bumblebee's optics flickered as he found the control panel for the core's energy flow. His fingers danced over the controls, and with a final decisive move, he rerouted the power. The core began to glow with an intense light, its energy building rapidly. "Megatron is gonna blow," Bumblebee shouted, his voice strained as the chamber began to rumble violently. Megatron disengaged from the Vicon commander, his optics narrowing as he saw the core's energy levels spike. With one final thunderous roar, he grabbed the Vicon commander and hurled it toward the core. The alien commander crashed into the device, its body consumed by the surge of energy. "Run!" Bumblebee yelled, already sprinting toward the exit. Megatron followed, his massive frame thundering across the shaking ground. The core behind them erupted in a brilliant explosion of light and energy, consuming everything in its wake. The force of the blast propelled them forward, sending them crashing through the outer walls of the facility as the entire structure began to collapse. They hit the ground, hard debris raining down around them as the Vicon base crumbled into ruin. The explosion had wiped out the entire facility, and the shockwave reverberated across the planet. For a moment, neither of them moved, the silence of the aftermath settling in around them. Then slowly, Bumblebee stirred, pulling himself to his feet. His armor was scorched, and his systems were strained, but he was alive. Megatron stood nearby, his optics glowing dimly as he surveyed the wreckage. He turned to Bumblebee, his expression unreadable. "The Vicon threat is over," Bumblebee said, his voice quiet but resolute. Megatron nodded slowly for now. The tension between them was still there, a cold reminder of their long-standing rivalry. But in that moment there was an unspoken understanding. They had fought together, not as enemies, but as survivors. Without another word, Megatron turned and began walking away, his massive form disappearing into the distance. Bumblebee watched him go, knowing that the next time they met, it would be as enemies once again. But for now, there was peace. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The endless plains of Cybertron stretched out before him, a wasteland of shattered metal and desolation. Megatron strode through the ruins of what had once been the proud city of Kaman, his optics scanning the decaying remnants of an ancient world. The winds that howled through the rusted towers carried the voices of Cybertronians long gone, whispers of a time when their civilization had reigned supreme. But all of that had crumbled away, leaving behind only dust and shadow. Yet amidst the ruins, Megatron had found something more, a promise of unimaginable power. His mighty hand reached down and grasped the object he had sought for so long, the Dark Matrix. Encased in layers of dust and debris, the artifact pulsed faintly, a dark and malevolent energy swirling within. It was cold to the touch, an eerie contrast to the oppressive heat of Cybertron's dying sun. He held it up, gazing into the abyssal depths of the Matrix. The legends were true. The Dark Matrix had the power to absorb all light, to cast entire worlds into eternal darkness. With this, Megatron could finally bend the universe to his will. He imagined stars blinking out one by one as he ascended to his rightful place as ruler of all creation. "The age of the Decepticons begins anew," he murmured, his voice a low growl that echoed in the silence of the ruin. Without hesitation, he activated his comlink soundwave. Prepare the base. I am returning with the key to our victory. As Megatron's words traveled across the Decepticon frequencies far away on Earth, a different transmission was intercepted. Bumblebee stood in the command center of Autobot headquarters, his yellow armor gleaming under the light. He had grown from a scout into a leader, but the weight of responsibility still sat heavily on his shoulder. When he saw the transmission on the screen, his spark clenched. The Decepticons had found the Dark Matrix. This is worse than anything we've faced before, Bumblebee said, his voice tight with concern. If Megatron activates the Matrix, it could spell the end of Earth and more. Standing next to him frowned. Her optics darkened as she studied the data. The Matrix absorbs all light. If Megatron uses it, he could plunge entire planets into darkness, one after another. No light, no energy. Everything would die. Bumblebee nodded, his mind racing. We have to stop him before he even gets the chance to use it. Gather the team. We need to move fast. Within minutes, the Autobots assembled in the war room, Archie's Ironhide, Wheeljack, and a handful of others. They all knew what was at stake, and the urgency in Bumblebee's tone left no room for doubt. We've intercepted Megatron South's coordinates, Bumblebee began. He swung on his way back to his stronghold on the Dark Planet, near the remains of Cybertron. It's heavily fortified, and the Decepticons have been building their forces there for years. Getting in one be easy, but we have no choice. Wheeljack leaned forward, his optics bright with determination. I've been working on a device that could disrupt the Matrix ability to absorb light. It won't stop it permanently, but it should give us a window to destroy it. That's our best shot, Bumblebee agreed. We'll now split into two teams. RC Ironhide, you'll lead the first team and create a diversion. Engage the Decepticons head-on and keep them busy. The second team, led by me, will infiltrate the base and disable the Matrix before Megatron can use it. Ironhide grunted in approval. I like it. Hit 'em hard and fast. They won. To know what hit 'em. Rashid's eyes flickered with resolve. We'll give you the opening you need, Bumblebee. But we were only going to get one shot at this. We can't afford any mistake. Bumblebee felt the weight of her words. As leader, every decision rested on him. If they failed, Earth and possibly the universe would pay the price. Let's make it count, he said. Autobots, roll out. The Dark Planet loomed ahead, a desolate and hostile world on the outskirts of the galaxy. It was once a barren moon, but Megatron had transformed it into a Decepticon stronghold, its surface dotted with towering fortifications and weapon systems capable of repelling any assault. The base itself was a monolith of blackened steel, rising from the surface like a dark cathedral to war and destruction. The Autobot ship, cloaked and running silent, approached the planet's atmosphere. From the cockpit, Bumblebee could see the Decepticon forces patrolling the skies and ground. This was no ordinary outpost. It was a fortress, designed to protect something precious, and now Bumblebee knew exactly what that was. Just get ready, Bumblebee said into his comms. We're re-entering the danger zone. The ship's engines hummed as it made its descent. Archie's and Ironhide sat across from Bumblebee, both preparing for what was to come. Arch checked her weapons, a pair of energy blades, while Ironhide locked and loaded his heavy blaster. You think Megatron sense expecting us? Ironhide asked, his voice a low rumble. I'd be surprised if he wasn't, Yarses replied, but we were not here for him. We weren't here for the Matrix. Megatron sense just the obstacle in our way. Bumblebee glanced at his team. Stay sharp. This mission is about precision. Our side Ironhide, once we were on the ground, you start your attack, keep them distracted, and give us the time we need. The ship shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere, and the dark, jagged landscape of the Dark Planet filled their view. They were close, now close to the moment where everything would be decided. As they neared the base, the Autobots split into their assigned team. Arcee and Ironhide led their squad to the planet's surface, moving stealthily toward the Decepticon patrol. The plan was simple: create chaos, draw out Megatron's forces, and keep them occupied long enough for Bumblebee and his infiltration team to slip inside. Bumblebee's other group, including Wheeljack and a few others, moved through a series of subterranean tunnels beneath the base. These tunnels had been used in the construction of the stronghold, and now they provided the perfect route for the Autobots to sneak in unnoticed. Wheeljack, how much time do you need to get that device ready? Bumblebee whispered as they crawled through a narrow passage. Not long, Wheeljack replied, his voice filled with nervous energy. Just get me close to the Matrix, and I'll do the rest. The tunnels were dark and cramped, and every step felt like they were walking into a trap. But Bumblebee kept moving, focused on the mission. The further they went, the more the air seemed to grow heavy, as if the Matrix itself was sapping the light and hope from the world around them. Suddenly, the commas crackled to life. We re-engaged. The Decepticons are chose. Voice came through, punctuated by the sound of blaster fire. They re-falling for it. We redrawing their forces away from the base. Good work, R2 Bumblebee responded. Keep them busy. We're almost there. The team continued their advance, slipping through the tunnels until they reached an access point that led into the heart of Megatron S-Bay. As they climbed through the vent system, they could see the sprawling interior of the stronghold. Decepticon guards patrolled the corridors, but the main forces had been drawn to the battle outside. Looks like RC's doing her job, Bumblebee muttered as they moved quietly through the vents. Let's move. Wheeljack guided them to a maintenance hatch that opened directly into the command center where Megatron was preparing the Matrix for activation. Bumblebee's optics narrowed as he saw the dark artifact hovering above a console, its energy swirling ominously. Megatron stood nearby, his hulking form radiating power and menace. At his side were his elite lieutenants waiting for the moment when the Dark Matrix would unleash its terrible power. This is it, Bumblebee whispered. Wheeljack, get ready. They dropped from the vent, landing silently behind a row of console. Bumblebee signaled to Wheeljack to move into position, but just as they began to advance, the Matrix pulsed violently, as if sensing their presence. Megatron's optics flared as he turned to face them, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Bumblebee, I was wondering when you'd show up. Bumblebee didn't waste time with words. He charged forward, his blaster raised, firing a series of rapid shots at Megatron. The Decepticon leader dodged with surprising speed for his size, his own weapon already in hand. The room erupted into chaos as the two forces clashed. Bumblebee darted around the consoles, firing at Megatron, while Wheeljack worked frantically to deploy his device. Megatron's cannon blasted a chunk of metal off the wall behind Bumblebee as he dove behind a console. Sparks flew, and the air was thick with the smell of scorched circuitry. Bumblebee gritted his teeth, quickly assessing the situation. Wheeljack was still scrambling to set up his device, sweat pouring from his faceplate as he worked under the pressure of their dire circumstances. You cannot stop what's coming, Bumblebee. Tarmy and Megatron's voice boomed over the clash of metal and weapon. The Dark Matrix will consume all light, all life starting with you. Bumblebee wasn't one to rise to Megatron's sentence. He ducked out from behind cover, firing 3 more shots toward the Decepticon leader, each bolt of energy narrowly missing Megatron as he advanced with deadly precision. The whole room felt like it was closing in, the cold energy of the Matrix casting strange shadows across the floor, making every movement feel heavier, slower. It was as if the darkness itself was pulling them toward the abyss. Megatron lunged, swinging a massive fist. Bumblebee leaped back, feeling the impact reverberate through the floor as the Decepticon's blow dented the ground where he'd been standing. The Autobarracks needed time, just a little more time. Wheeljack, hunched behind a terminal, finally called out, I am almost there. Just keep him distracted. Bumblebee didn't need to be told twice with a fluid motion. He launched himself into a rapid series of attacks, zigzagging between cover, unloading his blaster in short, controlled bursts. But Megatron was relentless. With a guttural roar, the Decepticon leader charged, his massive arm transforming into a blade slashing through the air with brutal force. Bumblebee ducked, narrowly avoiding the strike, but the blow sent him tumbling. He rolled with the momentum, landing in a crouch just in time to see Megatron's foot swinging toward him. The impact knocked the wind from him as he was thrown across the room, crashing into a wall. Groaning, Bumblebee pushed himself up, his vision flickering for a moment as he struggled to regain his footing. Megatron's shadow loomed over him, but just as he was about to deliver a killing blow, a blast of energy rocked the chamber. Arsag, Ironhide, get in here, Bumblebee yelled into his comm. The door to the command center exploded inward, and Arceus and Ironhide rushed in, guns blazing. Ironhide's heavy artillery sent Decepticons flying across the room, while Arce moved with grace and speed, her energy blades cutting through Megatron's sense forces with deadly precision. Megatron growled in fury, shifting his attention to the newcomer. You reel too late, slaughtering his fist into the control console. The dark matrix pulsed with power, and the lights in the room dimmed even further, the air thick with oppressive darkness. Not if I have anything to say about it, Wheeljack shouted. With a final adjustment, he activated the light disruption device. A high-pitched hum filled the room, and the matrix's energy faltered for a brief moment. The shadows that had been consuming the light flickered, and for the first time since entering the room, Bumblebee felt a glimmer of hope. Now Bumblebee Wheeljack called out, his hands shaking as he held the device steady. Finn got a small window. Take out the matrix while that's destabilized. Bumblebee nodded, his optics narrowing in determination. He grabbed his blaster and without hesitation charged toward the matrix, firing at the dark horde that hovered above the console. Each shot resonated through the chamber, sparks flying as the unstable energy of the matrix began to overload. But Megatron wasn't going to let it go that easily. With a roar of rage, Megatron lunged for Bumblebee, his massive frame slamming into the smaller Autobot. Bumblebee was knocked off his feet, skidding across the floor as Megatron and Sci-Fest crashed down, narrowly missing him by inches. "You fool," Megatron growled. "You think you can destroy me? I am the future of Cybertron." Bumblebee grunted, dodging another blow, his mind racing. The Matrix was still vulnerable, but he wouldn't get another chance if Megatron kept him pinned. He needed to end this, and fast. Just then, Ironhide tackled Megatron from the side, slamming his full weight into the Decepticon leader and knocking him off balance. Iris was already moving, her energy blades flashing as she struck at Megatron's exposed side, forcing him to retreat. "Now's your chance." Bumblebee Arce shouted over the dun of battle. With a surge of determination, Bumblebee leaped to his feet and sprinted toward the Matrix. He could feel the energy radiating from it, dark and cold, threatening to pull him into its void. But he didn't stop. He reached out, grabbing hold of Wheeljack's device and slammed it into the heart of the Matrix. There was a moment of silence, a single breath, where time seemed to stop. Then with a deafening crack, the dark matrix exploded in a blinding flash of energy. The force of the blast sent everyone in the room flying backward as the dark energy dissipated, leaving only the sound of the matrix death throes echoing in the silence. Bumblebee coughed, his system struggling to reboot after the shockwave. He could barely hear the faint beeping of his internal diagnostics, but when he opened his optics, the room was bathed in light once more. The Matrix was gone. "We did it," Bumblebee whispered, pushing himself to his feet. He glanced around the room. Ironhide was getting up, rubbing the side of his head where he'd hit the wall. Arceus was already helping Wheeljack, who was grinning through the exhaustion. But Megatron was still there, smoke rising from his damaged armor. He struggled to stand, his optics burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Bumblebee," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You may have destroyed the Matrix, but you haven't defeated me." Bumblebee squared his shoulders, his blaster still raised. "We're not done fighting Megatron, but today you've all lost." Megatron, as optics narrowed, he took a step back, his form shimmering as he activated a long-range teleportation device. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Autobots," he sneered. "I'd be back." In a flash, Megatron was gone, leaving only the wreckage of the command center and the distant rumble of collapsing wall. Bumblebee sighed, lowering his blaster. "Let's just get out of here before this place comes down on us." The team moved quickly, making their way out of the base as the walls crumbled around them. The explosions in the distance were a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. But they had made it. They had stopped the Dark Matrix, and for now Earth was safe. As they boarded their ship and set a course back to Earth, Bumblebee glanced out the window, watching the stars streak past. He knew the fight wasn't over. Megatron would be back, and the Autobots would be ready. But for now, there was a brief moment of peace, a small victory in a war that never seemed to end. We'll be ready for you," Megatron Bumblebee whispered to himself as he sat back in his seat. "Whatever comes next, we'll be ready." Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Bumblebee raced across the barren plains of Cybertron, the desolate landscape reflecting the devastation of a once glorious world. The distant glow of crumbling towers and ruins, remnants of a forgotten era, dotted the horizon. His processor buzzed with urgency. The message from Optimus Prime played in his mind on a loop. "Bumblebee, Megatron seeks the last key. If he finds it, Cybertron's fate will be sealed." The key, an ancient artifact that could focus the planet's energy into one being, granting its wielder unimaginable power. Bumblebee couldn't allow Megatron to possess it. As he sped across the wasteland, fragments of the legend surfaced in his memory bank. It was said the Primes had hidden the key long ago, fearing the corruption such power could bring. Only one worthy of Cybertron's salvation could unlock it. The idea that Megatron believed himself worthy chilled Bumblebee to his core. His alt mode, a sleek armored vehicle, glided smoothly over the rough terrain, yet his mind remained anything but calm. Ever since the war between Autobots and Decepticons began, Bumblebee had faced countless battles. But this one felt different. This wasn't just about Cybertron's future, it was about its soul. Suddenly, a flash of light in the sky caught his attention. Bumblebee screeched to a halt, transforming fluidly into his robotic form. His optics zoomed in on the source of the light, a flare of energy emanating from a nearby mountain range. Megatron, Bumblebee muttered, instinctively gripping his blaster. He knew that surge of power. It was Megatron's signature. The mountain range ahead, known as the Iron Spire, was ancient and foreboding. Legends told of hidden temples deep within its core, remnants of the first Prime's legacy. If Megatron had tracked the key here, time was running out. Bumblebee transformed back into his vehicle mode and sped toward the mountains, his scanners searching for any signs of the Decepticon. The radio crackled as he picked up faint transmission, static-filled but unmistakable. Megatron was already ahead, pushing deeper into the mountain's interior. As Bumblebee approached the entrance of an old mine shaft, his scanners detected movement. He transformed, creeping silently toward the cavern's mouth, readying his weapons. Shadows flickered along the rock walls. Decepticon patrol. Bumblebee crouched low, watching as two large Decepticons break down and Dead End stood guard. Their conversation was hushed, but Bumblebee had says, enhanced audio receptors picked up every word. This place gives me the creeps. Breakdown, crumble, ancient temples, hidden power. Why does Megatron need all this when we could just crush the Autobots like before? Dead End shrugged. Megatron-san's always thinking ahead. He doesn't want to just win the war. He wants to rule everything Cybertron, the Autobots, the universe. Bumblebee's spark surged with dread. This wasn't just about control. It was about domination on a cosmic scale. If Megatron succeeded in obtaining the key, there would be no stopping him. Silently, Bumblebee fired a precision shot, striking Dead End squarely in the chest. The Decepticon collapsed before he even knew what hit him. Breakdown barely had time to turn before Bumblebee lunged, slamming his fist into the Decepticon, set with a crack of metal against metal. Breakdown fell unconscious, leaving Bumblebee alone in the silence of the cavern's entrance. He stepped over the fallen guards and entered the dark tunnel. The air was thick with dust, and the sound of his footsteps echoed ominously. As he moved deeper, the walls began to shift, changing from rough stone to smooth, intricately carved surfaces. The deeper he went, the more he felt the weight of Cybertron, sentient history, pressing down on him. Bumblebee's sensors flared as he reached a massive, ornately designed door, clearly of Cybertronian origin, but far older than anything he had ever seen. Symbols of the Primes were etched into the surface, glowing faintly with energy. The door pulsed with a strange, almost hypnotic hum. He reached out, placing his hand against the door, and felt a surge of energy ripple through his circuit. A vision flashed before him, images of the Primes, a vast power contained within the key and the terrifying consequences of its misuse. He could feel the weight of their warning. This power was never meant to be wielded by one alone. Suddenly, a deep voice boomed from behind him. "You're too late, Bumblebee." Bumblebee spun around, his optics narrowing. There, standing in the shadowy entrance of the chamber, was Megatron, his eyes glowing with malevolent intensity. "Megatron," Bumblebee growled, raising his blaster, step away from the door. Megatron chuckled, his towering form advancing slowly, confidently. "Do you really think you can stop me, Bumblebee? You are but a scout, a mere foot soldier. This key belongs to those with the strength to wield it, and soon I will unlock the full potential of Cybertron." Bumblebee held his ground, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't defeat Megatron in a head-on fight. But he had one advantage: he had been chosen by Optimus Prime for a reason. Not because of his size or power, but because of his heart, his determination. The Prime's trials weren't about strength alone, they were about wisdom and purpose. With a sudden burst of speed, Bumblebee fired his blaster at the ceiling, causing a section of rock to collapse between him and Megatron. Dust and debris filled the chamber, giving Bumblebee a brief moment of cover. He darted toward the door, pressing his hand against the Prime's symbols once more. The energy surged through him again, stronger this time, guiding him. Behind him, Megatron roared in frustration, tearing through the rubble with brute force. "You cannot hide from me, Bumblebee. You are nothing compared to the power of the Decepticon." Bumblebee's hand glowed as he connected with the ancient technology. The door began to open, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. He wasted no time, slipping through the crack just as Megatron's massive fist slammed against the door. The passageway was narrow and winding, lit only by the faint glow of ancient Cybertronian ruin. As he raced through the labyrinthine tunnels, Bumblebee's mind flashed back to the stories of the Primes, the ancient guardians of Cybertron, who had once ruled the planet with wisdom and strength. They had hidden the key for a reason. Its power was too great for any one being to possess. But now that power was within reach of Megatron. Bumblebee's scanners detected the energy signature of the key up ahead. He rounded a corner and entered a vast chamber, its ceiling stretching high above, lined with massive statues of the Prime. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal, was the key itself, a gleaming, intricately designed object that seemed to pulse with the energy of the planet itself. Bumblebee approached cautiously, his optics scanning for traps or defenses. But the chamber was eerily quiet, as if waiting for something or someone. Just as he reached for the key, the ground trembled. Megatron burst into the chamber, his red optics glowing with fury. "You think you can take what belongs to me, Bumblebee?" Megatron's voice echoed through the chamber, filled with venomous rage. He raised his arm, ready to strike. Bumblebee grabbed the key just as Megatron lunged, barely dodging the Decepticon's side attack. The room erupted into chaos as Megatron's powerful strikes sent shockwaves through the ground, shaking the statues of the Prime. Bumblebee knew he couldn't hold out much longer. He needed to destroy the key before Megatron could use it. But how the key summons power surged in his hand, almost too much for his circuits to bear. Bumblebee's processor raced as he gripped the key, feeling the raw energy pulsing through it. His circuits struggled to contain the immense power. He couldn't allow this to fall into Megatron's hands. If the Decepticon leader used it, Cybertron would be lost. But how could he destroy something so ancient and powerful? Megatron advanced, his massive frame casting a dark shadow across the chamber. "Hand it over, Bumblebee. You are unworthy of such power. The key belongs to me." Bumblebee's optics darted around the room. The statues of the Primes loomed, their silent faces watching over the scene. It was as if they were waiting for something, as if they knew the fate of Cybertron rested on this moment. Bumblebee had always looked up to Optimus Prime, but now, standing in the chamber of the ancient leaders, he realized the responsibility that had been placed on him. He wasn't just a scout anymore. He was the last defense against Megatron's ambition. Megatron lunged again, his massive fist slamming into the floor just inches from Bumblebee. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, shaking the walls and causing dust to fall from the ceiling. Bumblebee rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, but he knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. His body was built for speed, not endurance, and Megatron's strength would soon overwhelm him. But then something caught Bumblebee's attention, the key still glowing in his hand, pulsed with a strange rhythm. It wasn't just a source of power, it was responding to him, to his will. He needed to destroy it. He needed to unlock its true potential. Bumblebee's mind flashed with memories, moments of triumph and sacrifice, of battles won and lost. He thought of the countless Autobots who had fought for Cybertron's freedom, and of Optimus Prime's unwavering belief in him. The key's power wasn't just about controlling energy. It was about purpose, about the strength to protect what mattered most. He looked up at Megatron, who was preparing for another strike. "You think power is what makes you worthy, Megatron. You will never understand what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." Megatron sneered, raising his arm to deliver a crushing blow. "Spare me your speeches, Bumblebee. You are nothing compared to me." Bumblebee acted in a split second, channeling the key's energy into his body. His circuits flared with light as the ancient power surged through him. The statues of the Prime seemed to react, their eyes glowing faintly, as if acknowledging his decision. As Megatron's fist came crashing down, Bumblebee met it head-on. The impact sent a wave of energy through the chamber, knocking Megatron back. The Decepticon leader roared in fury, struggling to regain his footing. Bumblebee staggered, his systems overloaded by the sheer force of the key's power, but he held his ground. The energy from the key was overwhelming, but it was also guiding him. He could feel the connection to the planet, to the very core of Cybertron itself. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a part of their history, their legacy. Megatron's optics flared with rage as he pushed forward again. You cannot defeat me, Bumblebee. The key's power will be mine. Bumblebee knew he couldn't hold on to the key's energy much longer. His circuits were already at their limit, but he didn't need to. The key had shown him what to do. In one final, desperate move, Bumblebee raised the key high above his head, focusing all the energy he had into a single point. The ground beneath them began to shake violently, cracks forming in the floor as the energy surged through the ancient structure. Megatron's expression shifted from rage to realization. So, what are you doing? Bumblebee's voice was steady, though his body trembled from the strain. I'm ending this, Megatron. This power doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Cybertron. With a final burst of strength, Bumblebee channeled the key's energy into the core of the temple. The ground beneath them split open, and a brilliant light erupted from the fissure, filling the chamber with blinding energy. The statues of the primes glowed brightly, their ancient forms seemingly coming to life as they absorbed the power of the key. Megatron roared in defiance, trying to fight against the torrent of energy, but it was too late. The key's power was no longer his to claim. The temple itself had become a conduit for the planet, energy neutralizing the threat that the key once posed. Bumblebee collapsed to the floor, his systems flickering as the overload of energy finally took its toll. He had done it. The key was no longer a danger, but as the light began to fade, he could hear Megatron's voice, weak but still filled with fury. This isn't over, Bumblebee. You've only delayed the inevitable. Bumblebee struggled to stand, his body battered and his circuits sparking. He watched as Megatron staggered toward the exit, his pride wounded, but his ambition still intact. The Decepticon leader might have been driven away for now, but Bumblebee knew he would return. Megatron always did. As the last of the light faded, the temple grew silent once more. The statues of the primes stood still, their eyes dimming as the energy dissipated. Bumblebee looked around the chamber, feeling the weight of what had just happened. The key, the power it represented, was no longer a threat, but the fight for Cybertron was far from over. He slowly made his way out of the temple, his steps heavy with exhaustion. Outside, the sky was dark, the stars barely visible through the haze of Cybertron's atmosphere. Bumblebee transformed into his vehicle mode and began the long journey back to the Autobot base, his mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. As he drove through the wasteland, the words of Optimus Prime echoed in his mind. You have always been more than just a scout, Bumblebee. You are a symbol of hope. Hope, that was what Cybertron needed, now more than ever. Megatron's quest for power would continue, but so would the Autobots' fight to protect their world. Bumblebee knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready. He had proven to himself and to the primes that he was worthy of the responsibility placed on it. And as long as there was hope, there was always a chance for victory. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wasteland of Cybertron stretched out before Bumblebee like a graveyard of metal giants. Once these towering ruins had been bustling cities, filled with the hum of life and machinery, but now they were silent, forgotten relics of a world ravaged by war. His sensors scanned the area, picking up only faint energy reading. There was something about this place that unsettled him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Bumblebee moved carefully through the debris, his yellow armor glinting in the dim light. His optics flickered as he crouched down beside what appeared to be an ancient Cybertronian artifact. It was partially buried under the rubble, its once glowing inscriptions dulled by centuries of neglect. As he dusted it off, his fingers traced the carvings, symbols he didn't recognize. He tried to make sense of them, but their meaning eluded him. Something's off about this, Bumblebee muttered to himself, his voice low and filled with suspicion. He activated his communication link. Optimus, I found something. Not sure what it is, but it's older than anything we've come across so far. There was a pause on the other end before Optimus Prime's deep, steady voice came through. Proceed with caution, Bumblebee. Ancient artifacts can hold more than just history. Bumblebee nodded. Even though Optimus couldn't see him, his leader's own words echoed in his mind as he carefully pried the artifact from the ground. A sudden jolt of energy surged through his systems, and for a brief moment, his optics went dark. When his vision returned, Bumblebee found himself standing not in the desolate wasteland, but in the middle of a battle. Massive warriors, their bodies glowing with an otherworldly energy, clashed in a violent storm of sparks and metal. He could see their faces twisted in rage, hear their war cries, but none of them seemed to notice him. It was as if he were merely a ghost, a witness to a war long forgotten. Bumblebee stumbled back, his processor reeling from the sudden shift in reality. What is this? As quickly as it had begun, the vision faded and Bumblebee was back in the ruins of Cybertron, the ancient artifact clutched tightly in his hand. His sensors were buzzing, his circuits still tingling with residual energy from whatever he had just experienced. He knew this was no ordinary relic. He rose to his feet, his mind racing the battle he had seen. It wasn't he part of the war he and the Autobots had fought. This was something else, something older. As he looked around the decaying landscape, a sense of dread settled over him. The war that had destroyed Cybertron wasn't the first, and it might not be the last. Without warning, his sensors flared to life again, detecting movement behind him. Bumblebee whirled around, his blaster raised, only to find himself face to face with someone he hadn't seen in a long time, Megatron. The former Decepticon leader stood in the shadows, his massive frame looming like a predator, waiting to strike. His red optics glowed faintly, filled with something Bumblebee couldn't quite place. Was it curiosity? Or something darker? Megatron, Bumblebee growled, tightening his grip on his blaster. What are you doing here? Megatron took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. His voice, once commanding and filled with malice, now carried an edge of weariness. I could ask you the same question. Bumblebee, these ruins hold no interest for you or for the Autobook. Bumblebee didn't lower his weapon. I am not here for you. I found something that doesn't belong in our time. Megatron's optics narrowed as he glanced at the artifact in Bumblebee's hand. I see, he muttered, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You've awakened it. Bumblebee frowned. Awakened what? Megatron stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the relic, an ancient war, one that predates our own conflict. This is no mere artifact, Autobot. It's the key to a time-long forgotten war that was never meant to end. Bumblebee's processor buzzed with confusion. What are you talking about? Megatron's expression darkened, his voice filled with a mix of anger and regret. The war we fought, the devastation we caused, none of it compares to the battle that lies ahead. You've unlocked something far worse, Bumblebee, something that even I fear. Before Bumblebee could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The air around them grew thick with energy, and in the distance, the ruins began to shift as if the very fabric of time itself was unraveling. Bumblebee's optics widened as he realized what was happening. The ancient war was coming back to life. We need to stop this, Bumblebee said, his voice urgent. If what you were saying is true, we can let this war destroy Cybertron again. Megatron's gaze flickered with something Bumblebee hadn't seen in him before, uncertainty. There's only one way to end it, he said. We must find the Chrono Crystal. The what? The Chrono Crystal, Megatron repeated, his voice tense. It's not the only thing that kept the war suspended in time. If we don't destroy it, the past will become our future. Bumblebee hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He knew he couldn't trust Megatron completely, but the stakes were too high. If this ancient war resumed, there would be nothing left of Cybertron to save. Fine, Bumblebee said, but if you try anything I want to hesitate to stop you. Megatron smirked, though there was no malice in it this time. Believe me, Bumblebee, I have no interest in restarting another war. Not this one. At least, together, the two unlikely allies set off toward the source of the energy surge, their path taking them deeper into the ruins of Cybertron. As they moved, the landscape around them continued to shift, as if the boundaries of time were bleeding into one another. Bumblebee could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the memories of a forgotten war seeping into his processor with every step. They reached the heart of the ruins where a massive structure stood, a temple that had long been buried beneath the surface. Its walls were covered in ancient inscriptions, the same symbols Bumblebee had seen on the artifact. The air inside was thick with a sense of foreboding, as if the very stones remembered the violence that had taken place here. At the center of the temple, suspended in midair, was the chrono crystal. It pulsed with a faint, ominous glow, its surface cracked and flickering with unstable energy. Bumblebee could feel the power radiating from it, the force that had once held the ancient war in stasis, now barely holding on. "We don't have much time," Megatron said, his voice low. "The crystal is failing." Bumblebee nodded, stepping closer to the crystal. His optics scanned it, searching for any way to stabilize it, but there was none. The only option was to destroy it, and with it, the ancient war. Before they could act, a sudden burst of light erupted from the crystal, and the air around them shimmered. Bumblebee and Megatron turned, their optics widening as figures began to materialize from the light warriors from both sides of the ancient conflict, their bodies glowing with the same energy that had fueled their war centuries ago. The battle had begun again. Bumblebee raised his blaster, firing at the closest warrior, but his shots passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. The ancient warriors were not fully real yet. Their presence was enough to destabilize the already fragile timeline. Megatron cursed under his breath, his fusion cannon powering up. "We can to fight them, Bumblebee," they re-echoes of the past. "Then what do we do?" Bumblebee asked, dodging another warrior as it swung a massive energy blade at him. "We end it," Megatron growled. He aimed his cannon at the chrono crystal. "This is the only way." Bumblebee hesitated. If they destroyed the crystal, they would be erasing the last remnants of Cybertron's ancient history. But there was no other choice. The war couldn't be allowed to continue. "Do it," Bumblebee said, his voice steady. Megatron fired. The blast hit the chrono crystal, shattering it into a million shards of light. Time itself seemed to scream as the crystal broke, and the ancient warriors dissolved into nothingness, their presence wiped from existence. For a moment, everything was still. Then with a low rumble, the temple began to collapse. Bumblebee and Megatron sprinted for the exit, barely making it out as the structure crumbled behind them. As the dust settled, Bumblebee looked back at the ruins. The chrono crystal was gone, and with it, the ancient war had finally come to an end. "Is it over?" Bumblebee asked, his voice quiet. Megatron didn't answer right away. He stared at the ruins, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke for now. Bumblebee glanced at him, unsure of what to say. The war between Autobots and Decepticons was over, but something told him that Megatron says fight wasn't finished. Not yet. Without another word, the two of them parted ways, each heading back into the wasteland of Cybertron. For the first time in what felt like eons, Bumblebee stood still, his mind buzzing with what had just happened. The chrono crystal, the ancient war, and Megatron's unexpected cooperation, it all felt like a whirlwind, as if history itself had pulled them both into a storm and spat them out into the present. His sensors flickered as he scanned the horizon. The ancient energy that had crackled around the ruins was gone, dissipating into the cold winds of Cybertron. But there was something heavier in the air now, a feeling of finality perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. Megatron's massive form was barely visible in the distance, his figure slowly fading into the landscape. Bumblebee wasn't sure what to think of the Decepticon leader anymore. The war they had fought seemed so far away, and yet the scars of it still marked Cybertron like open wounds. But this wasn't the end, not for either of them. They'd stopped one war from returning, but their world was still broken, and in some ways, so were they. Bumblebee felt the weight of his blaster in his hand and lowered it. His optics dimmed slightly, as if acknowledging that this was for the time being a moment of peace. He turned back toward the wastelands, walking alone as the wind howled between the ruins. As he moved, his processor churned with questions. How many more ancient conflicts were buried beneath Cybertron's surface? How much of their past had been lost to time only to rear its head again? As the thoughts swirled in his mind, Bumblebee found his steps, leading him back toward Iacon, the once great capital of Cybertron. The ruins of the city had stood as a silent monument to their past battles, but now with the knowledge of the ancient war, Bumblebee saw it differently. This place had seen more than just the civil wars of Autobots and Decepticons. It had witnessed something older, something darker. The city came into view as he crested a ridge. Its broken spires reached toward the sky like the bones of a long-dead giant. Bumblebee thence optics scanned the wreckage, noting the faint energy signatures that still pulsed in some of the old structure. He sighed, a soft mechanical whirs accompanying the motion. Cybertron was a planet of ghosts, both literal and metaphorical. As he descended toward the city, Bumblebee's communication link buzzed to life again. Bumblebee, this is Optimus. What is your status? Bumblebee hesitated for a moment before responding to the situation. Complicated, Optimus, I found something in Ancient War. It almost broke out again, but it's been stopped. Megatron was involved. There was a pause on the other end, and Bumblebee could almost hear Optimus processing the information. Megatron, what role did he play? He helped me stop it, Bumblebee replied, still unsure of how to feel about that fact. We destroyed something called the Chrono Crystal. It was holding back an ancient conflict, one that predates our civil war. If we hadn't intervened, Cybertron would have been torn apart. Optimus' voice was steady, but there was a weight to his word. Ancient conflicts have a way of resurfacing, especially on a planet with as much history as ours. You did well, Bumblebee, but Megatron's involvement concerns me. Bumblebee nodded, even though Optimus couldn't see him. It concerns me too. But for what it's worth, he didn't try anything. He seemed different. We must remain vigilant. Optimus said Cybertron's future is uncertain, and there may be more threats buried in our past than we realize. I know, Bumblebee replied softly, but at least for now, the dangers have been averted. As the communication ended, Bumblebee reached the outskirts of Iacon. The city's ruins loomed over him, casting long shadows in the fading light. He didn't know what he was looking for, here maybe just a reminder of what they were all fighting for. Or perhaps he hoped to find some trace of the Cybertron that had existed before the wars, before the fighting had torn everything apart. His steps echoed through the empty streets, the sound bouncing off the hollow building. Every so often, his optics would catch a glimpse of something, an old sign, a piece of machinery, a broken statue, that reminded him of a time when Cybertron had been more than just a battlefield. Bumblebee made his way to the center of the city, where a massive structure had once stood a grand monument to the planet. Unity before the divisions had begun. Now all that remained was a shattered foundation, covered in dust and debris. He knelt beside it, running his hand over the cracked stone. This was what they had lost. This was what they had fought for, and in some ways what they had failed to protect. As he stood there, lost in thought, his sensors picked up a faint signal. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Bumblebee turned toward the source, following the signal deeper into the ruin. Inside the alcove was a terminal, ancient, its surface covered in dust. Bumblebee wiped it clean, activating the terminal with a soft touch. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of symbols and data stream. Bumblebee's optics widened as he realized what he was looking at. This was information from the ancient war data that had been stored here, hidden away from the rest of Cybertron. He quickly downloaded the information, his mind racing. If this data contained records of the war, there could be more secrets buried in Cybertron, Sedgecast secrets that could either save or destroy their world. As the download completed, Bumblebee stood up, his optics scanning the ruins around him one last time. The past was never truly gone, and neither were the dangers that came with it. They had stopped one war, but there were likely others still waiting to be unearthed. Bumblebee turned and made his way back toward the edge of the city, his mind focused on what lay ahead. Cybertron's future was still uncertain, and the shadows of the past loomed larger than ever. But one thing was clear. They couldn't afford to ignore their history. The only way forward was to face it head-on, no matter what it revealed. As Bumblebee walked into the distance, the ruins of Iacondim, he knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more battles, and more secrets to uncover. But whatever came next, he would be ready. For now, though, Cybertron was at peace, and Bumblebee could take solace in the fact that, for the first time in a long while, the planet's future wasn't dictated by its past. The war had been forgotten, but now it was remembered, and with that remembrance came the hope that perhaps the future could be different.